Just a note, Amherst Media is covering multiple meetings tonight, so we went live right at 6:30 because they have multiple meetings happening. So even though the meeting hasn't started, just thought everyone should know that we are live as the clock struck 6:30. So just an FYI.
Sarah Beth, you're Union 26, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a Union 26 quorum.
And they're a regional quorum, so we'll just get rolling. So seeing the presence of a quorum, I call the Amherst Pelham Regional School Committee to order at 6:31 on Tuesday, September 27th, and we'll start with a roll call vote. Sarah Bess?
Sarah Bess present.
Margaret?
Margaret present.
Ron?
Present.
Peter?
Peter present.
Jennifer?
Present.
Allison?
I'm Union 26. I'm not the.
Oh, my bad, sorry. Oh, you're present anyway. But Allison?
Present.
And me, Ben, also present. We'll turn it over to Union 26.
All right, seeing the presence of a quorum, I'll call this meeting of Union 26 to order, and we'll do the same thing, go around the room and call present. So Ron.
Present.
Sarah Bess.
Sarah Bess present.
Allison.
Allison present.
Peter present, and our let's see, Irv and Sarah I don't see here, but if they join us later, they'll join us later. So our first item is superintendent's contract update, and unfortunately this is a brief item because of my mistake I made. So this item is to vote the superintendent's annual salary increase effective 7/1/22. I thought that this required an update to the superintendent's contract, but we had our counsel Mark Terry review it, and it turns out this isn't correct. According to Mark, the contract doesn't need to be updated in what setting. The annual salary increase is currently written. The language is sufficient, so that we only need to each year take a vote to set the increase each July 1st. So that's simple. However, since the meeting item, this one right here, is posted as superintendent contract update, and since that's not what we're doing, we'll need to reschedule this vote for our next meeting with the item properly described. So my apologies for the mistake. Sorry to have introduced confusion to the process. And that's it. So any questions before we adjourn? Union 26. Thank you for showing up, Ron. All right, seeing no questions, I'll move to adjourn Union 26.
Second.
All right, moved by Peter, seconded by Ron, and we'll take a roll call vote. Ron.
Aye.
Sarah Bess.
Aye.
Allison.
Allison, aye.
Irv, that I see has joined us. Irv, do you want to vote? Okay. Irv votes aye, and Peter aye. That's all of us, and we're adjourned. I'll turn it back over to our regional chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move on to approval of minutes. Did everybody have a chance to go over the minutes? On the 13th there. Anybody have any corrections, additions? Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, I think as an ongoing item, when we typically have shown like members present and shown what towns they're representing, which of the 4 towns. And so I think if we can add that into that members present list, so after each member's name in parentheses state the town that we're representing.
Yep. Anyone have anything else to add? Sarah Bess?
I just they're listed as ASC minutes, so we should probably be RSC.
Any other corrections? I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the minutes of September 13th, 2022 as amended.
Second.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Jennifer. And take a roll call vote. Craig,
I'll abstain. Thank you.
Irv,
Aye.
Allison,
Allison, I.
Peter,
Here I.
Jennifer,
Jennifer, I.
Sarah Bess,
Sarah Bass, aye.
Margaret,
Margaret, aye.
and Ben, I. Motion passes. And we find the next one. All right, and then we'll move to public comments. I have one written comment that I'll try to share here without messing this up.
Give me 1 second, Ben. Let me set that up. Sorry, I was a little behind. You should be all set to share it now.
Oh, is that readable? And I have one audio, so I'm going to try to fumble my way through this.
Hello, I'm Robert Brooks. My son is Bobby Brooks, a senior at the high school. We live on Pratt Corner Road in Leverett. I'm calling about the bus 25R problem. On Monday, the bus arrived at our house at 8:40, which is 2 minutes later than the scheduled pickup of 8:38. The bus arrived at the school at 9:02. While that's better than the 9:15 arrival that had been the norm for the first 5 weeks of school, that is still 8 minutes later than the scheduled arrival. That is still not acceptable. Students should arrive at school with enough time to get off the bus, go to their lockers, and get to their first class without being consistently late to class. Note that this is not a new problem for this route. Last school year, the bus was consistently arriving at the high school at around 9:10 until corrections were made in mid-October. Given the history of this route, we question how anyone thought that the published bus 25R schedule was possible to fulfill. Thanks for your time.
Can everyone hear that? Like, okay, is that all right? And then moving on to the superintendent's update.
Thank you, Ben. I'm going to start. Oh, I'm sorry. I think there's other additional public comment if I'm reading the room correctly, Ben.
Sorry about that. Katie, go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry, I wasn't realizing it was my turn. Good evening, everyone. I am here to comment about the report that was submitted from the Transition to Arms Summer Planning Committee, which I believe is on the agenda this evening. I just want to say what an incredible amount of work, and kudos to the committee who met for 4 days and came up with such great recommendations. I did read and reread the report. This is a topic near to my heart because, one, I am a 7th through 12th grade educator, and I do have a rising 6th grader next year. So I've been tuned in. The recommendations I'm all in agreement with. I mean, if I could advocate for actually language acquisition during that 6th grade year, I would, but I understand that there are, you know, priorities in terms of how to balance the time and the schedule and such. I do want to advocate for the 4 teams versus the 3-team model, simply because I know a lot of these kiddos are used to small, intimate classes. Fort River, for example, where my son attends, has only 2 classes of about 18 students each. So a smaller model will help that transition. And as the committee recommended, it allows for that increased social emotional learning and better um, rapport building between educators and students, as well as students to students. The one thing I do want to advocate for is to really think through what that 6th grade administrative aspect looks like. I know there was a recommendation that maybe a teacher take on that role. I would highly dissuade that. I think teachers are already going to be swamped. And I also see this as such an opportunity to shift culture at the middle school level, where you have 6th grade new students coming in. They're eager, they're excited. They have a reputation, at least at Fort River, of being a very, very strong, positive class, great leadership there. So capitalize on that, put a leader in place, whether you call that person a principal or whatnot, and use this as an opportunity to shift what has a reputation, I think, of being, the way New Jersey is looked upon in our own country, the armpit of the district, so to speak. So use it to shift the weak spot in the district. This is a great opportunity to shift school culture at that middle school level. So advocating for a leader who could do that, and look beyond just the logistics of a transition, but to really foster positive school culture at a time when developmentally these students need it most. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all your work. And thanks especially to the committee who put these recommendations forward.
Thank you. And I don't think there are, but do we have any more internal public comment here? All right, so now I'll kick it to Mike for the superintendent's update.
Sure. So this is the first regional school meeting since the passing of high school student Anna Burns. I think this has been well covered in the paper. I want to mention it because I think it's important. Anna was a valuable member of the ARPS community from elementary to middle to high school. And I just would ask that we have a moment of silence at the beginning of the meeting to acknowledge her passing, acknowledge their passing and acknowledge the impact that Anna had on our community. So if we could do that now, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. I want to also thank the ARPS and the ARHS in particular community for coming together to support Anna's family, Anna's friends, and having just bluntly had a similar experience in my childhood in terms of losing a friend in high school. What I continue to say is there's short-term, medium-term, and long-term impact. And I think the school and the school committee have done a fabulous job with the short-term impact. There's been counselors available, people have stepped up, students have stepped up, and it's been incredibly supportive. And now we're really transitioning to think about the medium and long-term impact of the loss of a friend, the loss of a classmate, teammate, and the impact it has on students. I was able to attend one of the kind of gatherings last week. And one of the things I heard very clearly from students is, thank you for this support right now, and I'm still struggling, right? This is not something that's going away very easily, nor should it. And so, I think I've had direct contact with Anna's family, who have been, really working to make sure, which is amazing, in my opinion, to work sure that friends and other folks are supported in that way. School and Talib and everybody at the high school, again, has been fabulous, as well as the middle school and elementary. But I think it's just something we need to keep an eye on, that, my own personal experience and research would suggest that this, again, I keep going back to short, medium, and long term, because the impacts are different at different phases and they're not linear. It's not necessarily predictable. Okay, a week later we'll do this and it'll be okay. I also want to think there's a number of other superintendents, athletic directors who have reached out about that and offering support. There was a Longmeadow student, for instance, also a cross-country runner who passed away last spring in a car accident. And our team of runners sent over some goodwill, and I know that that's being returned by many others in the cross-country community. So it's a tragedy, and our focus, has shifted to how do we support the family, how do we support classmates and staff members who knew Anna and had, just incredibly positive relationships with Anna. So that's where we are with that. Again, the short-term piece, I feel like we've done well, and now we really do need to shift our focus to making sure that students, faculty, and families are supported beyond the kind of short-term aspect. There's no good transition, but I will transition, I guess, chronologically. We also had a hard incident week and a half ago at the high school with fires set in bathrooms, and I'm limited to what I say. As I said in the email, along with Principal Sadiq, it was a crime, right? So there's, police involvement, but I think what I can say is, having been on site that day, incredible support offered by our police department, our fire department, and by CRES officers. We'll talk about CRES a little later, to make sure we were able to support everybody in that moment, as well as after that moment. I think, Ben, you were there in your other capacity as well. And what we saw is students who were outside, with lots of questions, and there weren't answers very quickly, handle themselves incredibly well, our staff members as well. So, it's sometimes in these hard moments where we people step up and do the right thing and support each other. And having viewed the video umpteen times about what had happened, there were multiple students who saw something happen and found somebody and told somebody, and that kept the school safe. So I don't want to minimize the impact of that, but it was a moment where we saw the community come together as well. And I want to thank, it's a strange one to say, but the bus drivers and 5-star drivers who weren't at work, literally, that we had to call and say, hey, could you pick up our kids? Because our drivers were at least at work, the drivers who work for the district, but other drivers were off doing other things. And we got the last bus left at 1:10 in the afternoon, which was pretty good given, the situation and scenario that played out. We've debriefed and learned a lot from that scenario, and we've taken measures to make sure that scenario won't repeat itself with the student or students involved. And I have to speak in general terms on that one again, because this is now with the police community as well as our work at the school. So really just want to thank everyone for hanging in. I think the juxtaposition of those two events was also particularly challenging for folks involved, and want to acknowledge that as well. On a different topic, this afternoon we had a flu vaccine clinic, which was well attended by faculty, students, and faculty members' families as well. So we were happy to provide that resource for us this afternoon. Middle school open house was last Thursday, if I'm remembering correctly, and really well attended. And people really enjoyed being back in the school. Right, it was a long time since families could come in. So thank you to middle school staff, Principal Sharon, everybody for putting that together. High school is this Thursday. So we look forward to having another really positive event. Again, opening that door that I know our families would appreciate. Last Friday, we celebrated some of the school committee members were able to attend. So thank you for coming. Puerto Rico Day on the Common. And we had over 100 students there. We had our high school bomba group come. They were phenomenal. It was the highlight of, the younger kids did performances, but what I heard as the younger kids were leaving was just amazement at the bomba group. So thank you to Remy, Nick, and all the faculty who work with those students. But it was really nice. And I want to thank, there was multiple school committee members there. So thank you for attending. It was great to have you at that event. And I want to thank Dr. Guevara, who's spearheaded this event for a long time. It does a great job of emceeing it. So that was really nice. And that's only part of what we're doing, as we're in Latino Heritage Month. So there's a number of events and things happening in classes and advisories in the middle school and high school to support that month. And I think, oh, no, I forgot a really important one. So I'm glad that I scrolled down on my list of notes. So very exciting. So Doreen Cunningham, our assistant superintendent, was invited by the Congressional Black Caucus and Congressman Danny K. Davis. She will be a participant in the 51st Annual Legislative Conference, which is happening later this week. And so they're convening under the conference theme, Advancing Our Purpose, Elevating Our Power. And she's coming to speak about some of the work that she has done in our district around advancing diverse faculty and staff. So later this week, I don't know what C-SPAN channel it's on, but I'm going to get that information. I'll try to share it out, but it is televised, and then we'll have a recording afterwards. But just a huge honor for her, but also a huge honor for us to have someone on our staff being recognized by the Congressional Black Caucus and invited down to Washington, D.C. to present. So congratulations to Doreen for incredibly hard work that's getting recognized by a major organization in our country. And I think that is it for my update tonight, but I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Sarah Bess, go ahead.
I don't have much of a question, as I just wanted to jump on the back of the ARMS open house. I was there as a mom, and it was fantastic. The teachers were all super excited and did a great job explaining their classrooms and making connections with kids. And it just, you know, I also had a kid who was there through all of the pandemic times. So having a chance to like actually be in the school and meet the teachers and see other parents and faces was fantastic. And I thought they did a really great job through the whole thing.
Anyone else? All right. So we'll move on to the chair's update. I have none, so that's easy. And then school committee announcements. Do you have any announcements or subcommittee updates? Going once, going twice. All right, so we'll move on to the CRESS MOU discussion.
So I think Earl Miller, the head of CRESS, for lack of a better term, is double booked, so he was not going to be able to be here till 7:30. So I'd like to request for the committee if we could shift some of the agenda topics so that we could accommodate Earl's schedule.
Move it down to D, maybe. I don't know if that works for folks. All right, so then we'll jump on the challenges regarding Leverett and Shutesbury bus arrival times.
Yep. So I can take, I'll do a brief presentation. Rupert Roy Clark is here, our facilities director, who's over transportation as well, to share this. Before I bring up the slides, I just want to note that it's really important that I'm in no way blaming anybody, especially Union 28. There's often this perception that there's this frequent tension between Union 28 and the region. And you know, Jen Colkeen is one of my closest colleagues. She's the superintendent of Union 28. Steve and Craig, I know Steve's not here tonight, but work with her. We talk very frequently, not just on snowy days. And, you know, just bluntly, we usually can work out any challenges that we have. And this is just one we haven't been able to resolve. And that's why we're bringing it here. I talked to Jen this afternoon. You know, I said, you want to come? You don't, you know, and we'll see where this goes. But we do have an issue, I think was noted under public comment as well. And I just want to describe where we are, where the issue came from, and then, you know, what potential solutions we're looking into. So I'm now going to share my screen, but I just thought it was important to note that. There we go. Okay. So it's a pretty brief presentation. So the first question may be, why are we having a conversation about transportation and Shutesbury and Leverett? You know, I have no official connection to Shutesbury and Leverett elementary schools. And the reason is, in the regional agreement as it currently stands, is that we, the region, are responsible for providing transportation. Oh, I'm sorry, there's a hand up.
Great.
Sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Why don't you finish? I'll ask a question when you're done presenting this. And
oh, okay.
yeah,
sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Like
No. It's okay. So in short, we, the region, provide transportation and work it out for all the elementary schools, including Shutesbury and Leverett, and they then there's a cost sharing of that transportation based on a rather complex formula, but essentially, even though we, the region, have no official relationship with Union 28, this is the one exception. As it relates to transportation, we do have a relationship with Union 28. So those runs are put together by our staff in collaboration with Union 28, but it is this sort of anomaly where there's a direct connection between the two districts. And I'm pausing for Craig. So I think you're,
Yeah, thanks.
yeah.
The first question I had was regarding cost sharing, and you answered that. I was just wondering, how is it through the regional assessment that it gets, costs get added on, or is it through a direct invoice to Union 28?
I will turn to Rupert for that one, because that one's probably more in his bailiwick. Certainly Doug could answer it probably the best of all, and Doug's not on this call tonight, but Rupert, do you have a sense of that? I think Rupert's on this call. Saw him earlier.
I can also contact Doug and
Okay,
ask.
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
I don't need to know the answer here at this meeting. I just thought it'd be helpful for everyone to be
yeah.
aware. But and then the other
I
question,
did find myself, so I can say that I don't know. And it would be Doug question.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and I can get that not just for you, Craig, but I'll talk to Doug and I'll send it out to everybody tomorrow.
yeah, it'd also be good to know what numbers are involved, just out of curiosity to have it. And then finally, and maybe you're going to talk about this, if there was interest on both sides to separate the transportation, is that even possible without amending the regional agreement?
Like many things in the regional agreement, the only way to change it is to amend the regional agreement. So it's every year at town meetings or town council in Amherst, since this is my 7th year doing it, we've had 2 articles for the budget, for instance. One is what the actual budget is, and one is amending the regional agreement to whatever formula has been agreed to, and this would be no different from that. That being said, I think there's good reason to expect that someone like me might suggest in the next year or 2 that we open the regional agreement more generally, because we have this 6th grade issue, which I know is later on the agenda. Is a regional assessment issue, which we're now moved away from what's in the regional agreement. So I think there's good reason to believe that whether the towns do it is obviously not in my control. It's not my bailiwick, but that someone might suggest that we need to open up the regional agreement for multiple reasons sometime pretty soon.
But short of opening up the entire regional agreement, the votes that are cast, that are taken at town meetings in the regional towns, or the member towns, is it possible to amend just one piece without opening up the whole agreement by vote, obviously?
It is, and actually Doug must be watching and messaged me what the answer to your first question is. So thank you, Doug, for spending time with us on Tuesday night. So the answer is we bill the towns of Leverett and Shutesbury, we being the region, directly for the busing of the elementary school students. Formula is a bit complicated, and he could share more details on that, but it's based on students and the mileage, which is what I sort of remembered was the mileage was a component, but it's also the number of students. And that's going to get a little gray later on in the presentation, and I think it'll explain why. I'll explain why, because there's some judgment about how many routes the elementary schools need and what's the most expeditious way, right? So this is why one of the reasons we're talking about tonight is it's complicated, and there's legitimate opinions on all sides that need to be considered, but we need to get a little bit better on how we're executing it. Any other questions about the regional agreement or the finances of it? Okay. And so the current situation, I'll just read this slide. It's short. Despite the best efforts, our transportation system has been unable to consistently ensure that some bus runs from Shutesbury and Leverett arrive to middle school, high school on time. It's getting better. I think the public commenter, I don't want to keep going back to it, but I think that was an accurate sharing that we've shifted things. It's getting closer to 9 o'clock, but it's not at 9 o'clock every single day. for particularly there's 3 buses in Shutesbury and Leverett that tend to be slower to arrive. And that's a real problem for our students. When it gets there at 9:02, that's not much different than Amherst and Pelham buses that are primarily from Amherst and Pelham. But when it's quite a bit later, it is involved a real impact on students. And we are working hard, as the next slides will show, on how to resolve that. But we are getting stuck at really truly getting there at 9 o'clock. So here's the causes. Just bluntly, there's an insufficient amount of time between when the elementary schools start and the secondary schools start. In Amherst and Pelham, we've shifted the schedule so that it's at 8:10 bus drop off at the elementary schools. Leverett and Shutesbury contractually, I believe in both districts, whether it's contractual or just the way it's been, it's 8:15. And you might say 5 minutes, what's the big difference? But actually the 5 minutes is the big difference right now. We've got it down where buses aren't getting there at 9:15, but that 5 minutes is having a major impact. And that's not a critique of Union 28 and when they can drop buses off, but it's creating a problem for our secondary school students. We also have the variability of weather-rated road conditions. So in some of our member towns, there's a lot more dirt roads. When we have heavy rains, like we've had a couple times already this fall, those dirt roads get much harder to drive on. And that creates challenges, and we're not even at winter yet. We have construction projects in the towns. I think it's only going to be 1 or 2 days of impact, hopefully. But, you know, if you read the paper, I think yesterday, or I believe it was in the paper yesterday, there's a major one on the road that connects Shutesbury and Leverett, and that road's going to be closed for a couple of days right around Indigenous Peoples Day. And there's not a lot of detours when you get to rural roads, right? It's not like, oh, you just, you know, take the next road down. The next road down may be a mile down. And that's just based on the topography of Shutesbury and Leverett. It's, again, there's no critique there, but it really doesn't allow for alternate roads to be able to drive in, you know, the similar amounts of time. And the last one might be something that makes less sense or is less obvious, which is significant turnover of bus drivers. So when we have significant turnover, that means that drivers are less familiar with their routes. And so some of the challenges we had at the beginning of the year, again, no critique of bus drivers, but when you have people doing the similar routes for years and years and years, they know the roads, they know how to manage it, they know the road conditions, they can make judgment calls on weather-related days that you wouldn't be able to do if it's your first time driving. And you know, honestly, the fact that we're not talking about driving a shortage of drivers right now as compared to last year is a good thing, but the new people still are getting the ropes, and our timing is getting better as people do the routes more often. And you know, they do routes before the school year, but until you actually have kids in it, it's really hard to judge and assess the length of routes in terms of stops and all that, especially at the elementary level, where on and off sometimes can be a little lengthier than at the regional level. Any questions on causes before I go on to what we're working on? Okay. So here's what we've done that has made it working as well as it has. So one thing that has not always been the most popular, but we're annually changing the routes based on what students are actually here. So in the past, we had sort of this past practice of no matter who is there, we more or less kept the routes the same and sort of managed some of the differences. But we are much more efficient now because we're looking every summer who are actual students, where they actually live, and we're making adjustments. And the reason I kind of say unpopular is it means sometimes kids who are friends are on the same bus one year and they're not on the same bus the next year. But it means kids are on buses for fewer amount of minutes, fewer amount of miles, fewer amount of gas, less amount of gas, right? I mean, it's all sorts of good things, but I don't want to minimize that we've had some, you know, real, like, you know, friendship kind of things that haven't been able to be maintained. We've also, in terms of unpopular things, somewhat, we've reduced the number of stops, but we've created neighborhood stops. This is not new. We talked about this a while ago for those who've been on the committee. I can tell the story of, you know, my own kids and them being able to see 2 bus stops in a non-dangerous area and just saying, well, this doesn't, you know, they could walk, you know, 50 feet to the next stop, because every time you have a stop, you stop the bus, it takes more time. It also is where, from an energy efficiency standpoint, you lose a lot when you stop and go. When you're actually going, it's much more, you know, better in terms of environmental impact. So I really do appreciate the community. We're much more aligned to other districts. We had many, many more stops for the amount of miles a couple years ago, and Rupert and his team have done a great job of trying to align. You know, it means some sometimes people are walking a little further, and it's been better for the runs and also better for the environment. The third one is a significant change. So historically, Amherst runs were Amherst runs, and Pelham runs were Pelham runs, Shutesbury runs were Shutesbury runs, and Leverett runs were Leverett runs. And so at this point, we've kind of blended, we've not let town boundaries be a barrier to making the most efficient runs possible. So we now have, about close to 70 students and a number of stops on runs. So if you live in Leverett or Shutesbury and you're right near the border of Amherst, you might be on a traditionally Amherst run, because that's going to be both better for the system, but also better for, how far buses are going to pick you up. So that, I know it sounds like a small thing, but it's actually been a significant change in terms of our efficiency. We've really ensured that we're dropping it at Shutesbury and Leverett elementary schools right at 8:15, and they've been, everyone has crazy mornings, but we do appreciate that they've really worked with us to really have those drop-offs be as close to 8:15 as possible. We also further refine routes. What we notice is some students never take the bus, and we always have to plan for them to take the bus. But when they haven't taken the bus for multiple years, we adjust. And some of the changes that you heard about on bus 25 have been based on, readjusting routes based on who's actually taking the bus, not who technically could take the bus. The last one is, some creativity from our transportation team. We looked at a model that would have combined 2 routes into one at Shutesbury Elementary. It really would have solved the problem at the region. And this is not a negative statement against Shutesbury or about Union 28, but they felt like it wasn't doable based on the amount of minutes and the amount of students. And every community has different standards and different expectations around that. And we're trying to balance our efficiency with also working with our member towns on that. And it's a delicate balance, but sort of our philosophy to date has been, if an elementary school says no, that run can't work, then we try to work around that. And that's what happened in this particular situation. And I will pause because I see there's hands up.
Peter, and then Craig.
So if you're aware of the details, could you share a little bit more about that? Like what were the particulars? I know I'm not asking you to make a judgment, your personal opinion about whether it was correct or not correct to support the solution, but could you talk about the details of where the disagreement was, and also, is there blanking on the word, is there a process for resolving these kinds of disagreements, or is it just when the region and the elementary districts want to do something different with regards to the transportation implementation, or do we just say, okay, well, we can't agree, and then we just go with what the elementary district wants to do?
So that's why we're here, right? In some ways, is that, we haven't had this level, and I wouldn't say disagreement, it was, Rupert and his team coming up with a solution that works on paper, but, we don't know the kids. There's some things that we can't assess. So, I think the route would have been roughly 38 minutes, would have had roughly high 40s numbers of kids. And there was a concern that was expressed by the school, and I'm just trying to be cautious because of confidentiality, but that kind of the length of the bus, the number of kids, and the mix of kids would not be in students' best interests. And so that's as far as probably I feel comfortable going, because it's not my determination. I don't know the kids. And there was some concern that 38 minutes wouldn't have been realistic. I think until we actually drove the route, it would have been hard. But I think the process to resolve it is to talk about it here and perhaps with the elementary committees. And, and I did share with, Superintendent Colkeen that we'd be talking about it. I shared the presentation with her before it became a public document. We collaborate, we work really well together. And this is one we just haven't been able to resolve. I think, she could come up with creative solutions. Like, why don't, instead of dropping off at Shutesbury and Leverett Elementary at, if 8:15 is too late, then could we start the high school at 9:05? And then we get into contractual issues with our staff who end the day at 3:45, and also the implications for sports and other things. So, we are trying to come up with solutions. We haven't found one that works for everyone. We are somewhat bound by contractual pieces of start day and end day, at least for this year. And, whether this ends up being Shutesbury and Leverett elementary school committees having conversation or some joint meeting, I think that's what I'm hoping to get out of the conversation tonight, is what are some process next steps, because right now we haven't been able to resolve it. And I do want to note it's gotten better, right? So the comment about 9:02 doesn't, it makes me a lot more comfortable than 9:15, and that's where we were, 2 weeks ago. So things are getting better, but I think rightfully they're not better enough, and I don't want our Shutesbury and Leverett secondary school students being disadvantaged by the arrival time to school. And right now, I think while it's improving, it's not to my level of comfort. So hopefully that's as much detail as just since it's not my district, I feel like I can't go any deeper than that.
Craig, go ahead.
Just a question about the 8:15. First of all, what time have you done a review of what time would make it work? Is it just 5 minutes, or is it you would want to drop off at 8 a.m. or 8:05 or 8:07? If in an ideal world.
Rupert's ideal world might look different than my ideal world. But I think I do think the 5 minutes, would make a difference. I mean, I think ideally probably Rupert would prefer a little earlier, but from what I observe, we're now down to really that window of 9:05 is really when those buses are getting there, and the Amherst buses are getting there right at 9 o'clock. It's not like the Amherst buses are getting there 8:45.
Right.
But
you really
Rupert,
need to find 5 minutes somehow.
yeah, I mean, I want to give Rupert the opportunity to disagree with me publicly, which he may, and he's enabled to do. But I think that's an accurate retelling. Is the 5 minutes would make a pretty big difference for us, and more would be great. But I also understand the complications of, when elementary teachers arrive and all that. Rupert, do you have any additional thoughts on that one, since you're the one hearing the calls every morning?
Well, let me just say this. Ideally, in my ideal world, we would have an hour difference between drop-off time at one school and drop-off time at the next school. That builds in excess time for traffic, for weather, for what have you. Having a sub-driver that's not familiar with the route, whatever. An hour would give us, I think, plenty of time to be much more reliable. Excuse me, much more reliable at being early. That said, 5 minutes makes a difference.
And to follow up on that question, it says the earliest time allowed by contract. Is that specifically Shutesbury? Because I'm looking at the Leverett contract and I don't see an 8:15 mention on the work day.
I believe it may be a Shutesbury contract, since it's not it's right. Unfortunate Steve's not able to be here tonight unless he's come in and I haven't seen him. But for us, our just for the Amherst and Pelham folks, just for context, the teachers work day, all staff members work day, I should say. Teachers and paraeducators starts at 8 o'clock, but we make sure student arrival, the buses drop off around 8:10, which gives enough of a window. It's tight, but it's enough of a window for make sure that people are able to greet the buses.
Allison?
Yeah, I have a few questions, but I think the biggest one is sort of wrapped around this. What is our standard for sort of acceptable arrival times? Because I would imagine that we can't sort of say, we're looking for buses to always arrive punctually at 8:59, because there's always going to be a little thing. So what is that sort of band of acceptability for defining when a route is consistently late or consistently early, and so could do that? And how do we track that performance? Like, are you literally standing there and checking, on a daily basis, the arrival time for buses? And part of the reason why I'm asking this is because I live 2 miles away from Amherst High School, and my kid's bus has been late almost every single day since the start of school. It's gotten closer to its scheduled pickup time, and they're arriving late at school. Also, sort of after 9 a.m. This was the same last year as well. So, what is that band of acceptability? Because it feels like it sounds like it's acceptable for some routes, but not for others. Or is it consistently that way? And but we're just talking about this one particular one because it's more complex.
I think we're talking about these routes because there have been more than a few minutes late consistently. So for me, You know, I've been out at the high school maybe 5 times this year when arrival gets there. And I think what I've seen in terms of when teaching starts is that if buses are there by 9:05, that's in that sort of like, you know, 8:55 is more or less when I start seeing buses come in. To your point, they can't all get there at the same time. There's not enough room for them to queue up in front of the school. So, you know, personally, I'd like to see it a little closer to 9 o'clock, but that 8:55 to 9:05, because of the because it's a 2-tier run, there's drop-offs at the middle school and drop-offs at the high school. So there's always going to be runs that are a little earlier or a little later at each site because of kind of that dynamic. Rupert, is that, I see you're nodding your head. So hopefully, yeah. But with these Shutesbury and Leverett runs, we're seeing 8:10, 8:15. I mean, 9:10, 9:15. And while it is getting better, it's still not good enough. You know, they're consistently later, and everybody knows it at the high school. I mean, when I've been there in the morning, it's like, you know, oh yeah, you know, Shutesbury and Leverett kids are coming in. You know, it's pretty clear. There was one Amherst bus that was late for the first week or two, and then has a problem was resolved with the route, and now is quite on time actually. So that the reason we're talking about these ones is they're consistently late and not just 2 or 3 minutes.
Jennifer?
I have some questions, but I wanted to give Mike a chance to finish the presentation. And then I can ask my question.
That works for me. I think I have one more slide, so it'll be quick. Yes. So what else are we looking at? So we're looking at adding a bus or a van to specific stops to reduce the overall drive time. So that involves hiring a driver, which is not in long supply right now. So, and it's not and also getting an either bus or a van, which we don't currently possess. So this is not a quick fix, and it's also not a free fix, right? It is something that is something we should look at. And, you know, I think to Craig's point about paying for it, this is where it gets gray, because we'd be adding this in some ways because an elementary run wasn't able to be removed. And that's where how this gets accounted for financially gets very fuzzy and very uncomfortable. Because if there is a free option that's not being, you know, supported at the elementary level, is it on the region to then add a route? So this is one where we're not making any decisions, but it's very uncomfortable because we generally don't deal with this particular one. You know, it's just a straight calculation. Doug does it, but this one feels gray. And I've told, you know, Superintendent Colkeen it feels gray. There's no secret about that. And the other thing that the transportation department is doing is adding more Shutesbury Leverett students to Amherst Pelham routes. You know, again, like, you know, that area near the Amherst Pelham line, if we go deeper into Shutesbury Leverett, that could help those routes get there more on time. But to Allison's point, you know, then we're adding number of students and time onto Amherst routes, which aren't all getting there as early as we like. And so, and then also, you know, the community really doesn't like when they see a bus that looks a quarter full show up, right? We hear from that an awful lot. And, you know, whether that's an optics problem, I don't know how to solve that one, but, you know, we often in budget time say, well, there's only, you know, 20 kids on that bus. I see it every morning. And that may be very well true, but based on the geography of the area, that may be the most efficient way to do it. So that may be more an optics problem than a real problem, but it is something that I think we all struggle with and all deal with. So that's sort of where we are in terms of other models to explore. We are very open to ideas from both committee members and community members. This is something Rupert and I have spent, I think Rupert would agree, more time than he'd like to spend and his team would like to spend this year. Things have gotten better. We've narrowed the gap. And at the same time, there are very legitimate concerns coming from the community that we are struggling to resolve, and they're logistical in nature, which, you know, usually is a good thing, but in this case, we're struggling to be able to solve them. And that's for no lack of, you know, good effort by Rupert and his team, as well as Superintendent Colkeen and her team. But it's a reality, and we wanted to bring it up to the school committee because it is something that is impacting our students and faculty. So that's the end, but thank you for Jennifer for letting me finish. I appreciate it.
Yep, Jennifer.
So Mike, can you tell us what are the actual school start times right now for elementary and middle school, high school?
So at the elementary level, well, this is where it gets, let me ask a clarifying question. So when student arrival time or when we believe instruction begins? Because there's
Well, I
always,
actually,
especially at the elementary level, there's a pretty decent gap because we
yeah,
don't start when kids
I
get
was
there.
I was hoping to hear both. The
Okay.
roughly what time do students arrive, and then what time does school start for both?
Yeah. Sure. So again, I can only speak for Amherst and Pelham Elementary, but the arrival time starts about 8:10. I think we're down pretty well. That's about a 10-minute gap between the beginning of that and when students arrive. Many teachers start with a morning meeting or some kind of exercise that, well, I believe it's instruction. I think when we think about time on learning, I think we would have an interesting conversation about that. But I think by 8:25 we're seeing kids in class and learning happening. There's also a breakfast program at the elementary level, and especially with the young kids, we have to be realistic about what we can expect them to learn while they're eating. And at the regional schools, it's 9 to 3:35. And so I think what we've seen is that 9 to 9:05 period is the settling in period. And I think, I don't know about everyone, but I think most people are pretty comfortable with that being a settling in period when students are arriving. And that's not just buses, that's also kids getting to school and other forms of transportation, whether that's bike, whether it's being dropped off, whether it's driving their car. There's sort of a wide range. And I think there's a 5-minute grace period where we understand that students are getting to class for different reasons. And dismissal starts about 3:35 at the regional schools. Oh, I didn't say dismissal at the elementary. I'm sorry, I apologize. So dismissal at the elementary is about 2:35, and at 2:40 the buses are leaving to drop kids off to make sure they can get back for the regional runs. I apologize. I did that out of order.
That's okay. Actually, I wasn't worried about the end times.
Okay.
And what were the old start times before we made the change last year?
Right. So the old start times were about 7. The bell rang at 7:45 at the secondary schools, and the elementary school start time was sort of about 8:35. So to Rupert's point, there was a bit more wiggle in that schedule.
Yeah. So yeah, and this is something I noticed when we made the change because I have my student started 7th grade with the change. So we never experienced the middle school with the old schedule that currently elementary starts later than high school used to start. So it's not so much that we swapped start times. It's just that like we swapped the order, but we sort of made everyone start a little bit later, which is good. Like
Yeah.
I mean, it's not good or bad, but it just is what it is. So like the high school and middle school used to start at 7:45, which sounds super early. I'm glad I didn't have to live through it, but is it and Rupert said and on your causes slide you say that insufficient amount of time between the start times is one of the causes. Is there a way to make more time between the start times? I maybe you've talked about this already in terms of contracts with our educators and how early that they get there, but is it possible to have the elementary start a little bit earlier?
So oh, sorry.
Sorry, are we asked? I think you were describing the start times for Amherst and Pelham, but the issue we're talking about is Leverett and Shutesbury start times in elementary school. So I think, right? I think so. I'd be curious to hear the answer to the question about whether it's the start time for Leverett and Shutesbury elementary schools, since that's what we're talking about.
So I think Craig has his hand up. He might be best able to answer for Leverett.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the exact start time with me. I should have thought about getting that. However, I can say, having been on the negotiating committee for the teacher's contract, it was a real point of contention that the teachers union felt they had to adjust their start time and change their workday simply because the region had changed its. And so it's not a simple relationship, it is complex. So what was resolved, at least in Leverett, was a handshake. We'll make this work. And, I think Mike, if he went back in his emails and saw correspondence from Jen back in, I guess, May, when we were still working on this, as when Jen Colkeen and I discussed this at length of what can we do? We have contractual obligations to our teachers in Leverett, but the region changes its time, it changes. So everyone has got contractual obligations and we're all just trying to make it work as best possible. So the teachers at LES, at least, they did make accommodations. And I'm looking at our contract now, and it says the workday starts at 8 a.m. So that's why I was a little confused about, and I just looked at the bus schedule, at least that was published in late August, and it shows most buses, the latest bus arrives at 8:11, from what I could tell, or that was scheduled. Whether that's changed or not, I just don't know.
And I can. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I thought you were
No,
done.
I'm pretty much done. I mean, I don't know the exact start time, but I can say that it's not so simple to say LES and Shutesbury should change their start times. They've got bargaining units that won't necessarily agree.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is what I heard from Superintendent Colkeen this afternoon was that the buses do get there earlier, but the kids are held on the bus till 8:15. And so the buses can get there earlier, but it doesn't actually resolve anything for the region. And our teachers and our elementary teachers in Amherst and Pelham also, our staff, paraeducators as well, start the workday at 8 o'clock. And I think just one note is that wasn't for paraeducators that's changed, but for teachers, that's not a change from before.
Sarah Beth?
I guess so. It hasn't been a problem on the other end, like getting back to pick up kids to bring them home. That's less of an issue.
From what I see, it
would make sense to me.
Rupert's going to be the best answer to this one.
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of taking kids home, the way that we've resolved this issue is basically making longer runs for Leverett and Shrewsbury kids. They're on the buses longer than I would like because we have fewer buses to distribute them. And the reason why we have fewer buses to distribute them in the afternoon is that not enough Leverett and Shrewsbury elementary buses can make it to the high school after their runs to pick up the middle and high school kids.
Gotcha.
Does that help?
Yeah. And then I have one more question. So when we were talking about the start times at the high school and at the secondary level, when are the kids marked late?
So I can jump in on that one, Rupert. So I think that grace period of 5 minutes is pretty typical. I think when we get beyond there, the school makes an announcement that bus 25, whatever bus numbers are late, so the students are not marked tardy. I can't say that's 100% foolproof. I think it's worked pretty well. But most mornings, if you're there at 9:10, you'll hear some announcement about some bus being late and make sure those students aren't marked tardy. So Jaden's nodding her head because she probably hears that announcement every day, or not. She might be on one of those late buses. I don't know. But that's sort of how we manage it so that students aren't like penalized for tardies. I think the concern I have is they're penalized by not having access to the full period of the 8-period classes, if that makes sense.
Yep. Thank you.
Jaden, go ahead.
Yeah, so I do feel like I have to speak on this because the bus that was in question is actually my old bus, the one that they were talking about in the recording. And luckily, I do not take the bus anymore because I'm fortunate enough to have my license and a car that I can drive. But yeah, teachers have been very good about not marking students tardy who are on those buses, and the office has been very good about announcing that. But as Mr. Morris said, it's more about like just not getting to school on time. Like if you have a test A period, like those 5 minutes are very valuable. You don't have time to go to your locker. For athletes, many of them have to drop off their equipment, so they don't have to carry it around all day. You don't have the opportunity to do that. And also, just in general, maybe this is the price you have to pay by living in Shutesbury and Leverett, but the bus, like kids who live in deep Shutesbury and Leverett, their bus comes exceptionally early. Like I had to leave my house early this morning because I had a meeting with my guidance counselor at 8:15. So I left at 7:50 and there were kids out waiting for the bus. Like school starts at 9, and I live about 25 minutes from the school, and they're out at 7:50. Like, it's insane. When school started at 7:45, I had to go out and be ready for the bus at 6:30, 6:35 in the morning. And I think this was mentioned earlier, but as it gets to the winter, it just gets worse because roads get very slippery. It's unsafe, especially the dirt roads. My bus went down Pratt Corner, which is the road that was mentioned before. It's a crazy road. It needs to be paved or something. It's very unsafe. But I would strongly recommend maybe exploring the last two models on the slide, because I don't think there's enough buses for Shutesbury. Even though, like, I remember in middle school, sometimes there weren't enough seats on the buses because they start at one end at Shutesbury and then they just go all the way down Shutesbury, and it's like it can get really crowded. I don't know how it is now, but that's how it was when I was riding the bus. So that was just that's my experience with the bus in Shutesbury, if that helps at all.
Mike, quick reply,
Yeah,
and then
just-
Allison.
Do you mind if I just respond to Jaden's comment? Because I think it's worth responding. Thank you. So I want to thank you. And I think everything Jaden said, she encapsulated a lot of like what I had in the slides and my words much more succinctly. So that was great. And lived experience. And I think the only thing I'd add is I think the number of students in the bus now is a lot better now that we broke down the Leverett Shutesbury barrier so that it doesn't literally, it just geographically, you can look at a map and you can say, oh, you have to stay in Shutesbury. And I really want to thank Rupert and his team, because I think it doesn't cut the same way it used to, the way you're describing when you were younger. It's still a problem, but I think we've looked at geography and not worried about town borders. And that means it's not, if you're zigzagging across Shutesbury, it just doesn't make any sense. And so I'm sorry you had that experience, but that one aspect is a lot better. And, that really came from a lot of work from transportation departments. So we're not where we want to be, but I think that regard is much better. So I want to thank Rupert publicly for that.
Allison.
Yeah, I don't think I realized that we were like trying to stick within town border boundaries, and so I also thank you, Rupert and team, for looking at more efficient routes that aren't constrained by that sort of artificial restriction, because I would imagine that also saves on fuel costs as well. And better for the environment overall. I think one of the things when I asked about start time, it was not to suggest that another district that I have no role in whatsoever should consider changing its time. So I apologize if that was the impression that I gave. But I think when we landed on the start time, there wasn't any sort of magic formula or dictum that said it had to be at 9 o'clock. And I think it evolved a little bit. Maybe I'm misremembering. So that was more what I was asking. And the other thing too is when we talked about it, there was a sense, and maybe I'm misremembering it, but there was a sense that by switching and having the bus routes sort of for the elementary schools in each of our 4 towns sort of running first, because those would be efficient and potentially shorter, that the impact on sort of the region, like overall, we might end up with a more efficient transportation system, because what was happening was the buses having to start and go the much longer routes at an earlier hour was impacting then also the elementary schools in an adverse way. And so I think we had thought or estimated that we might have a more efficient system. And I think what we're hearing is but there's aspects that didn't work out as efficiently as we might have hoped. And so, I do wonder if there's like a third one, and I'm not advocating it, but I think as we're talking through options, do we just start school at 9:05 instead of 9? I mean, I know that has significant implications on potentially on the back end, but hearing you, Jaden, talk about sort of that impact, it's not just do you get there, in time for 9 o'clock start. Most students need that extra time. Also, you want to get there a little bit earlier, so you're not racing through the halls of the school to get to your first class, or trying to take care of things because you're late for your first class. So I wonder if that like is an somewhat artificial, or not not completely, solid constraint that we're putting on ourselves when we're looking at this.
I think Rupert and then Mike.
Rupert, do you mind if I jump in just on that particular point, because it's something that that I think
Please
is
go ahead.
worth mentioning.
Go ahead.
So I think any change to start time and end time would involve some level of either bargaining or impact bargaining with some unit. And I think that'd be the conversation to have, both region and perhaps with some of the elementary colleagues. And it's a tricky one because of our governance system. If we were a K-12 region, we'd be having different conversations, but we're not. So Craig's reporting out from Leverett. Steve, when he was here, can report out from Shutesbury. And so it's a little awkward that way. But I would like to have those conversations so that we can make a decision collectively as a combined district in some ways, or districts. And then someone can then have an impact bargaining conversation. Because right now it just feels choppy, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just choppy because of the governance system that we have, that we try to work around, in my personal opinion. But Rupert, I'm sorry, I just want to jump in on the contractual piece before you jumped in on the more transportation end of things, I believe.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. To Allison's point, I want to provide a little bit of history. Traditionally, Leverett and Shutesbury have been served by a different bus company than Amherst and Pelham, and we structured our bus bidding contract to allow for that to happen, so that the bus company that was more Franklin County oriented could cover the Franklin County towns. What happened in 2019 was the Amherst, the more southerly bus company, won both bids. But traditionally, they've been done by different companies, and that made a difference to have the rigid town definitions of what bus served what company. And just to follow through on that point, as we blur the lines between the towns in order to facilitate transportation issues, we also, I think, are making it more difficult in the future to have a more competitive bid for the Hilltown, for the Leverett and Shutesbury busing contract in the future when that comes up for renewal. So that's something to sort of keep in the back of your head. The other point that I wanted to make is when elementary school started first, we had certain routes that only served Leverett and only served Shutesbury and did not try to get to the region because of the amount of time it takes to get from the end of one route to the beginning of the next. And now we're reversing that so that we now have more routes that only serve region AM and PM and skip the elementary schools in Leverett and Shutesbury simply because there isn't enough time to get from, once again, the end of one route to the beginning of the next. And that's something that we can adjust, and it doesn't have a huge financial impact. But the net result of all of these adjustments are that we use all the buses that we've contracted for, not necessarily 4 routes per day, 2 AM and 2 PM, but we need and use all of them. Thank you.
Peter, go ahead.
So this has been a very educational conversation for me, but I'm kind of looking at the clock and knowing that we're not going to solve this tonight. I think we've done a really good job of highlighting all of the ways in which this is complex and difficult. But in terms of just trying to think about next steps, action items here, I think the thing that would help me the most is to hear from the Leverett Elementary School Committee and the Shutesbury Elementary School Committee, or Union 28, however that organization decides things. Not too familiar with it. About which of the solutions talked about so far are the least disliked, and then let's think about what the practical implications are to pursuing that. Because the core principle I come back at this moment, it could be different if we discuss this again. From a regional point of view, is that in the regional agreement we have the regional school district, us, has an obligation to provide transportation for the elementary districts. It doesn't say we have an obligation to provide whatever the elementary districts prefer, and so when I see that there is a cost neutral solution to adjust the elementary routes that would solve the problem, that is just rejected by one of the parties, I find that a little difficult. So I would want to understand, you know, is that, I know that's not ideal, but would this be the least disliked solution? And when I hear about the buses arriving at the elementary schools at 8:11 and just idling there until 8:15, where they can contractually let the kids off, that to me seems a little suboptimal. And so I understand that there's impacts to contractual things and would need to be worked out. And some, but maybe that is the least disliked solution. I'm sure nobody is going to race and say, let's just throw 70K or 140K if it takes two routes at the solution. But if that's how we need to go, then we need to talk about cost sharing, if and what the impacts are of rejecting cost neutral solutions. I think it also, I think for the community and for, coverage of this in the public, should really emphasize what a razor thin margin this regional district budget is operating on. When we're spending this much time and it's this much of a difficult problem to consider adding 60 to 70K to an operating budget of our size, it really underscores how tight our member towns are operating and what a difficult conversation it is every year to sustain the services and infrastructure that we have. To me, that's one of the bigger take homes here. If you're from the state and you're listening to this conversation, this is like exhibit A about how regional school districts need to be better supported.
Rupert, did you ever reply to?
Just very quickly, I would like to say I went up to Shutesbury Elementary School a couple times this fall to observe what was happening. And what I experienced was that buses were arriving before, a couple of buses were arriving before 8:15, a couple were arriving at 8:15, and the staff were unloading the buses promptly, even though it violated our agreement with them. So I feel like the Shutesbury staff are doing their best to help us out at this point in time.
Jennifer.
So I'm cognizant of the time and I don't really need an answer or to brainstorm ideas, but just my one thought is, it sounds like there maybe was a small glimmer of hope with the Shutesbury proposal, the Shutesbury idea that you came up with to combine two routes in Shutesbury, but that was not accepted by Shutesbury Elementary. But can we build on that? And is there a way to either refine that proposal to make it more palatable to Shutesbury, or to take that idea and apply it? Maybe there's two other routes that can be combined to just try to somehow, because that was like one, Dr. Morris said that would have solved the problem, and it's not acceptable to Shutesbury Elementary. And I get that, and I respect that. But so can we do something in that genre of solution? I mean, maybe you guys have already tried to think about creative solutions, but just like, can we grab onto that thing that almost worked and build on that? So I don't need an answer now, but just something to think about.
The only thing I would say, if it's okay to just close out, is, I'd love if, and I'll share this conversation, with Superintendent Colquhoun, but Craig, if you are able to get any feedback from the Leverett School Committee, it'd be really helpful. I think a couple other people mentioned it earlier, whether it's a joint meeting or subset of this group that wants to meet with a subset of Leverett and Shutesbury, I do feel like cross conversation is helpful, even if it's just to everyone have the same understanding, because I know the elementary committees are going to be rightfully, as they are in Amherst and Pelham, rightfully focused on the elementary schools. That's their charge. And so it'd be great from my perspective if we could, come up with a solution by actually having the right people have the right conversations. And this is really helpful to me and Rupert, but I also think it'd be great to include the elementary folks in some way, shape, or form. I don't know what that looks like. I defer to Craig and Steve on that, but I'd like to have that conversation.
Just so that I can better inform myself, Rupert, you mentioned visiting Shutesbury. Can you describe the issue at Leverett, or is it something you'd rather do outside of a public meeting? Or just because I was looking at, I don't have any hard information other than that Shutesbury's principal did not approve the proposal. So I don't know if there's something that can be done in Leverett, or if it's...
Well, one of the Leverett Elementary routes, when it goes to secondary, does pick up Shutesbury and elementary kids. From what I've seen, Leverett Elementary is getting the kids off of the bus promptly so that that route can do its secondary route in a timely manner. So I don't have immediate issues. The Leverett buses that do secondary routes are not the ones that are as chronically late. The way that we've designed the routes and the way that folks are getting off. I mean, my experience has been that both elementary schools are doing the best they can with a hard situation. So I mean, I'm happy to follow up with you, Craig, offline,
Right.
but it doesn't. I don't have anything more to add at the moment. I don't think.
Thank you so much.
All right, unless there are any objections, we'll go ahead and move on to the next topic. Good to go. Also, I lied earlier. Instead of dropping the first topic down to D, we'll go ahead and put that for B now. I see we have folks here. I'm not going to make you guys suffer. So we'll start with the CRESS MOU.
Great. And I think I'll maybe do a little intro, and then Earl and Talib. And Talib's in the middle of another event, so I know his time is short. So thank you for being here, Talib, as well. So CRESS is a new department in the town of Amherst. And Earl will do a better job than I will about describing their mission and the work. But what we have really appreciated is that they've been able to support us. They're not the police, but they have worked with us on resolving conflicts and mediating and just being an incredibly helpful presence. And I think it's important to note this is really targeted, right? This isn't a way to have a school resource officer without having a school resource officer, right? It's not like, oh yeah, so we don't have a school resource officer, therefore Earl is at our building all the time. We'd love Earl to be there because Earl's just generally a good guy, but that's not what we're talking about here. I think I gave the example earlier in superintendent update when we did have the fire situation and we were, making sure that the building was secure and we were letting students and faculty get back in to get their things. There were police officers there. There was at least four officers or CRESS folks. They're also supporting this, right? When we had, the rumor of a potential conflict in an athletic event, we didn't want to escalate it because it didn't feel that real to us, but we felt very, very comfortable having CRESS folks there. So it's a very targeted intervention, but it's really supporting us in our work, both, during the school day in terms of how we respond to certain matters, and also at after-school events and other aspects. This summer, we met with Earl, one of his staff members, as well as Scott Livingstone and one of his staff members with the full administrative team. And I think the thing I really appreciate about Earl is he's flying the plane as he's building it. That's not easy. Those of you who have done that in different roles, it's not easy. There's a lot of eyes on Earl, and he comes with a smile. And he's helpful in every situation I've ever seen him in, even hard ones. So, for us in the schools, it's been a real net benefit to be able to collaborate with folks who have been trained in conflict resolution and mediation and all sorts of things like that. So, I just want to say that for this conversation, the goal would be to gather feedback from the regional school committee, because we do intend to work with Earl to draft an MOU. Or MOA. I know some people have a preference for one or the other. Pretty flexible that way, so that we can have a paper document that describes the kind of role and responsibilities of the school, the role and responsibilities of CRESS, and how we're going to collaborate together moving forward. But with that, I'll turn over to Earl. Actually, Talib, do you want to jump in? If I can delay you one more minute, I just want to be respectful of Talib. He's the best dressed guy at the meeting, right? He's at another event, and Principal Sadiq can maybe just describe a little bit of how Earl has functioned in terms of the work of the high school. Then we can let Talib get back to his other event. Sorry to delay you, Earl.
All right, thanks, Mike. So, this is the beginning of CRESS being an organization, but I've had a lot of meetings with Earl. He's been great so far and really cooperative and trying to support us in many of the ways that Mike just mentioned. One of the things that I've asked them to do in the process of creating is helping us to offer an alternative to suspension by overseeing some community service in the town by students who obviously make bad decisions in school, and they would support us for then be on Saturdays. Students would have the option of giving back to the town, doing something positive. instead of just sitting at home and serving a suspension. I think I'm really looking forward to getting that up and running. I know there's a lot of demand on Earl and Crest right now, and still in the beginning of creating things. In other ways that Mike has mentioned, they have been supportive starting actually last spring when we had meetings beginning of the fourth quarter, when we had to really get a little bit tighter with the rules. You know, the first 3 quarters really about transitioning back and helping students get comfortable being around one another. And in the fourth quarter, when we started implementing the rules a little bit more strictly, Earl was there for some of the presentations, helped meet, met some of the students. He's been there at other functions, him and other members of his staff. Been really a pleasure to work with, that I'm looking forward to, building a relationship and creating more opportunities for them to interact with our students. I know one of the things that we haven't had to ask them to do this yet, and I'm glad, but we have, social media is a challenge, and sometimes conflicts between students start on social media. And when we find out about those conflicts at say 7 or 8 o'clock at night, we're not going to do home visits, but Earl and some of his colleagues could do those home visits to stop, to hopefully intervene before the kids get back into school face to face. Like I'm saying, we haven't had to ask him to do that yet. Hopefully we never will, but it's good to know that that is an option to help, prevent conflicts from escalating. It's a quick summary. And again, he's been a pleasure to work with, and I'm looking forward to really creating more of a solid, steady relationship and collaboration with Earl and the rest of the members of CRESS.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for making time. I know we interrupted you from another event, and we want to make sure you can get back and enjoy that one. But I think at this point, we'll turn it over to Earl to describe a little bit about CRESS.
I should have definitely had Talib go after me. I'm really lowering the dress code. I do not wear my uniform all the time. I was just in a Rochester event with Minneapolis, Rochester, Albuquerque, and other communities that are attempting this journey with us. So I just want to start off by saying CRESS is hard to conceptualize. It is a radical departure from what public safety has looked like. So we are currently writing policies. We have no interest or desire, and we will put it in a policy that we do not surveil. We have no law enforcement authority, so we don't have the ability to detain or arrest folks. We're not, at this point, we receive no oversight from the PD. We work with them in a collaborative way. So information that we collect is not shared with anyone and would not be shared outside of, duty to warn requirements that are placed upon us by the state. I'm really proud to say we have 3 responders who went to schools, who graduated from Amherst schools. We have 3 responders who have their children currently in the schools, more than that, who have family members in the school. Part of our approach is we have the benefit of being one of the smaller towns attempting this. We are one of maybe 2 towns under 100,000 people, the other being Northampton, so it's not a real far trip to the other one, attempting this. And so we have the opportunity to do a little bit more than places where they're really focused on things like gun violence. Not that we're not concerned about that, it's just the data tells us it's not something to spend all of our time on. Our goal with the school is really, if you look at trauma-informed approaches, kind of best practices nationally, one of the things that we're trying to shift in public safety is to not just be responding when the worst case scenario has happened, but to do some prevention work. An example of that is we had an opportunity last year to support a parent. There was some engagements at a bus stop that weren't working well. The parent was struggling, and there was some potential that the student might not be able to go to school if this wasn't worked out. And so me and my program assistant provided transportation to school for this parent. And we also were able to connect the parent with some services. And I think maybe more than anything, just be a shoulder to lean on, which has been important in that relationship. We want to support all residents of this town, and kids are residents, right? They live here. They deserve to get some benefit from this thing. I think to Michael's point, I wish I had the time to be in the schools all the time. I learn something new every time I'm there. It wouldn't be doable for us. We're really showing up on requests from the principals, are the folks who have called us in on scenarios. We're there generally for the incident, whatever's come up, and then we leave because we got other stuff to do. And also, we don't we don't want to replicate that piece of public safety where we're kind of hanging over waiting for things to happen. I think the teachers at the school are well equipped to do their job, and they don't need us more than they ask for us to be there. So I know this is a really complicated piece. I expect this to be a hard, challenging conversation. The work you all do is some of the most important work in town. I have school-age children. I hope they have advocates who are as fierce as you all, and I expect you to stay that way. And I find the culture in the schools. Crocker Farm makes me cry just about every time I go in there. Just seeing the pictures of family, but maybe more importantly, hearing the way that Derek Shea talks about families in this community. It's one of the first conversations I had, and it's one of the ones I reference the most in how we put this department together. And ultimately, I hope some of these kids want to grow up to be CREST responders someday. I hope this is something that serves them for the rest of their lives. And I look forward to not just this MOU conversation that we're having, but long-term hearing from you all, how we can improve, how we can be better, and how we can support our shared mission of making this a place where growing up is easier and not so scary. So, that I could do this intro piece for hours. I just did it. So I will give you the short version, and glad to answer any questions or just hear folks if they have something to say. Thank you.
Sarah Bess, go
ahead. Can you just tell us what CREST stands for?
Yeah. Community Responders for Equity, Safety, and Service. I would just say the other piece is just kind of defining that. We are a anti-racist organization. We are a minority majority organization. And really kind of what we look like is a human service agency nestled in public safety, which if it feels weird, it sure does feel weird for me sometimes, but it is our truth.
And Irv, did you intentionally lower your hand, or?
I didn't raise. I raised my hand, but I did not lower my hand.
All right. Go ahead. We'll take you, and then I'll take Peter.
All right. So first things first. I really support. I have always supported CREST as it was originally adopted by town council. I didn't agree in terms of fully implementing it as the way it was implemented, in terms of fully implemented, because I thought budgetarily the town couldn't afford it. But I did and still do support the mission, objectives, and goals of CREST. But when I look at it in terms of the MOU as it regards to schools, I have certain reservations, and therefore those reservations need to have some clarification. And the reason they need to have clarification is that as originally approved by the town council, the schools were never a part of this, never, ever considered a part of this. So I really want clarification, acceptance, understanding by all the parties, including the town council, that buy off on this. I do not wish for us, the school committee, to be caught up in any kind of controversy or in terms of, hey, how is this being utilized by the school when it wasn't a purpose of CREST in the beginning. So I want to prevent that. I also, in terms of the MOU, there are about four or five things that I really want to make sure that the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, includes. It has been stated that all interactions between CREST and students are going to be consensual. So I want the operationalized consensual engagement to include rules of engagement. And I want those rules of engagement to be in the hands of the students, the parents, and the teachers, so that everyone knows what that means and what it looks like, so that there's no ambiguity as to those kinds of interactions. Because when you say consensual, that is a very powerful word, and it needs to be operationalized so that everyone understands what it means. Second, the MOU must distinguish whether, in terms of how Crest is to be treated, whether in the schools. That are they to be treated the same as or different than teachers or other school personnel in terms of authority? That needs to be clarified in part of the MOU. It also should include that the school system, the school committee, school administration are not going to be charged for any and all Crest services. That needs to be a part of the MOU. Crest services will be requested on a targeted, specified basis with no regular or routine assignment to the schools. And that needs to be a part of the MOU. If it's going to be different than that, then the school committee and the community needs to know that. I would like to see all of this be very targeted, very specific, and that they're not routinely stationed at the school, etc. They're called on an as needed basis. Also, the MOU will be reviewed by the town's attorney, the school's attorney, and results reported to the school committee, so that we understand how this MOU is being viewed legally, and moreover, that MOU and that legal review shall address issues of liability and authority.
So I just want to say, Irv, I disagree with you on some portions of that. I don't quite understand the piece around the schools being listed specifically. We're a public safety entity, so we would, by the nature of that, cover all of the town. The pieces about financial are above my head, so I just want to acknowledge that I'm not the right person to speak to that. I'm open to the idea that we would not participate in the schooling. I just want to be clear that would be a loss of something to the schools. If you all don't believe that it's appropriate for us to be there, I don't think, we will be on way to continue. I think it will represent a loss to the schools of the opportunity to have us participate in things. That is ultimately your call. Things about consensual contact are actually not decisions we've made. We are not law enforcement, so we do not have the legal basis to detain. And I just want to, this is your role. You decide we're going to be there.
You're breaking up.
I just want to be clear that I don't want to make it seem like I'm insisting on being in the schools. I think we can be helpful, but if folks don't agree with that, totally open to the idea that we wouldn't do that for some period of time. I think we add something there, and if folks disagree, that's really your decision to make.
Earl, just so you understand, what I'm outlining are things that I think should be a part of the MOU. This it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the school committee signing off on something so that everyone understands what's in this agreement. So
I just want to be clear that the work we're doing does not represent mission creep. It represents we are lined up with what the town has asked us to do and what the LEAP report suggested. And I just want to be clear because I think, there are folks who are not going to be a part of this longer conversation hearing this piece. And it makes it seem like there's been some shift in our understanding. Talib was maybe the third person I met with in town. Mike was probably the fourth. So these were folks that the town introduced me to early on. And I just want to make sure that I'm really defending what the department is doing. We want to be an ally, but if that's not something, folks, that's on the table, right? It's up to you all to decide if we're going to be a resource.
Again, I'm only talking about the MOU. The MOU is really important so that the school committee has a document that it can refer to. It has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with mission creep. It has nothing to do with the Crest people involved. It has everything to do with the town and its perception and willingness to really concretize that which they see what Crest should be doing. For us, concretize it in relationship to the schools. That's all it is. I really have admired the work that you're doing. I hope that you continue to do the kind of work that you're doing. I want to make sure that we, as a school committee and also the town council, protect you, Earl, and the Crest people by putting a blanket around them in terms of the of what the expectations are.
Thank you. I'll take Peter and then Allison.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Earl, for being here. I also really appreciated what Tal had to say, and the biggest reason I am really excited about what this program can become over the years, and really grateful for the services that you've already provided, is that this is coming from a principal need, right? Like principal, like Talib is overseeing the middle school, Diego I'm sorry, Talib at the high school, Diego at the middle school, other principals we've talked about in other committees, and they're experiencing some really difficult situations, right? That either could happen between parents at an athletic event or a drop off, the students, and it's a situation where when Chris wasn't there, like in years past, it would be a really difficult call for the principal of do you have to call in a police officer? How do you handle this situation? Do you just ignore it? Do you not do what Earl was talking about in terms of the proactive outreach, and do you just hope that something doesn't fester? So the examples that the Talib cites, and that Earl is talking about, these support services, to be able to take it, for our principals and our staff and our students to be able to take advantage of that and enhance our support services with is incredible to me. I mean, I feel like writ large, parents and students, it's a difficult world, and I feel like wraparound support services, social services, are not at the level they should be in all areas, and so. I really struggle with that on school committee sometimes because budgets are really tight. We just talked about another logistical item that it would be great to solve with extra budget. If money was no object, we would be providing a lot more support services for our students, for our parents, but we're not able to. So to be able to take advantage of this is really great. I really love the ability and the expertise of the responders to be able to do that proactive outreach outside of the school grounds. That's the other thing that our administrators struggle with, is that once there are students and families are at home, there's a lot that goes on there that affects learning, right? And affects readiness to learn, and affects things that could potentially impact learning. But we just don't have the scope of authority to go out there because of our limitations. So to have that extension and that visibility to help our families and students is just a really wonderful thing for me to think about. And I think the last thing that I really love how Earl describes this is the relationships. I love the fact that there are responders with ARPS experience, who know what it's like to be a high school student, and with all those difficulties that you may experience, and not knowing how to navigate certain situations, and just knowing the environment. I'm just grateful for what you've already done. As I think the plane being built in terms of the service, is really well understood here. But I think the more that there can be a really great collaboration between you and Talib and Diego, and our guidance counselors and the other mental health support network within the schools, I think it's just going to be tremendous. So thanks very much.
Thank you. I tried to do teaching at the beginning of the pandemic. I have 2 kids, so I've never had more respect for what schools do than my very fumbling attempts at it for a few months. So I'm glad to be a part of this. And like I said, there is a selfish interest in this. My folks improve when they interact with school employees, when they interact with the kind of depth of experience they have. My folks are better for that. So I don't want to seem too altruistic. It's making my job easier.
Allison.
Yeah, I want to say sort of, or build on that sort of thought. I find I've heard you now a few times talk about sort of the work that you and your team is doing, and it's inspiring. And I think one of the things that sort of I really hold on to, and you described a little bit, and Talib, you did too, is the sense that our students are people that have lives beyond the walls of our school, and I think for me that is really what sticks with me about sort of how partnering with CRES can be really, really helpful, because as Talib and our principals and our teachers all know, like the lives that happen outside of our school buildings have a direct impact and significant impact in some cases on our ability as schools to serve and support the students in our care. And I think you know, we don't think about it often enough in the context of our school committee. And I think you know, you bringing that in and describing that and sort of how your approach and your sort of philosophy is really grounded in that, of thinking about sort of how do we support the residents of our community wherever they happen to be, whether it's in our school building, at a bus stop, in town. And so you know, that I find really inspiring, because we know that to be true for our students, that they can be successful only when sort of all of their needs and their whole lives are met. So I'm looking forward to sort of seeing what that can look like, and I really appreciate, Talib, you describing sort of your thought process as to ways you think that this partnership could be helpful for your work in the high school. And I'm comforted also by each of you, both Earl and Talib, describing that, you know, this isn't about putting a substitute for a school resource officer in this school. That's not what it's about. It's really about thinking about, as you said, that the whole person and the whole human, and where can we help when there are crisis situations, whether they're happening in the walls or outside of our campus. And so I'm comforted by that, and to, you know, trust that when we get to actually seeing an MOU document, that will be reflected in there. I also, sorry, now I lost my next thought, but I'm curious, because I know that you know, from a public safety perspective, I mean, you described the incident that happened just recently with the fires in our the bathrooms, and how public safety connected with and supported the school in through that incident and that emergency, and that involved both CRES and Amherst Police Department and Amherst Fire Department. And I'm just curious, is because I don't think that having an MOU with a town public safety team is a new or unique thing, that we have these in place for other situations, that describe sort of exactly what Irv, sort of the question that Irv raised, is who's in charge in a crisis situation, who's calling the shots, and that. I know we don't like to think about crisis situations or emergencies, but I imagine that that's sort of the intent of an MOU, is specifically to describe sort of roles and responsibilities in those kinds of incidents. And so I guess that sort of leads into that question. And do we have other examples of MOUs that we can compare this to?
I'll just offer, this is not the only MOU we're working on. I think we're in some process of maybe 24 of these with different entities that exist. And just to be clear, the same way I think Chief Livingstone or Chief Nelson would say, I direct my people wherever they are. They're under my direction. I know their training. I'm the person responsible for them. In fact, it's interesting, the high school event, Chief Nelson actually asked us to show up. So that deployment was, you know, I think we were able to support the school while we were there, but Chief Nelson is the person who reached out to me and asked me to bring responders to the scene. And in that situation, we would work under the direction of whichever of the 3 public safety entities is the lead agency. That obviously the fire department was the lead, so we were following their direction. And so I don't want folks to feel like the MOU is burdensome. This is life. We're writing policy, we're writing MOUs, and we are able to look at the pre-existing ones with the PD and the fire department. And in fact, thankfully, we have folks who've been around long enough to ask about what those negotiations were like, what was contentious, what was agreed upon, so that we're not exactly starting from scratch. Although, like I said in the last one, the last time we did this, starting a new public safety department, there were horse and buggies in front of town hall. So just, I just want like that, building the plane while you fly it. I'm learning every day takes a little bit more time. So any patience you can give us on this MOU, we will do it in a speedy fashion, but we want to make sure that it's a document we all feel comfortable with. But that also is flexible to, we may get this down and the next day have an incident that makes us relook at it. And so that we have that ability to match up what's on paper with what the work is telling us. That's a flexibility I find more and more important every day.
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think just on our end, from the school's end, there, an MOA, it was over 10 years. Oh, wow. More like 15 years ago, there was an MOA signed by the superintendent of schools, the then police chief, and actually the district attorney at that point, because of the nature of information sharing. And so we do have models of MOAs or MOUs with other public health agencies and sort of how they're written and how they function. And while the role of CRES is quite different and it's not, fully applicable, at least there is some sense of a lot of the questions I've heard today about role responsibility and information sharing, things that we need to make sure, and our attorney would need us to make sure that we're clear on, and the attorney for the town and Earl will also want to make sure is clean. So we do have some models that we can at least look at the structure of them and utilize them to think through what this looks like for Crescent for us.
Oh, go ahead, Irv.
Yes, I just want to make sure it's clear. Policy is something that I'm really interested in. And I also know that policy is that which protects those people who work for those who are in charge. And that is why I'm insisting upon having the correct policies in place for CREST within the schools. I do not wish for it to come about that this new group can be crushed by public opinion, when that public opinion should be directed at those who put together the policy and approved the policy, not the individuals and groups, individuals involved. So again, policy is a protector and a protective screen for those who work within the system. Without that protective screen, the people and the agencies and the organizations within that, under that umbrella of the policy, become convenient targets for public outrage.
I just want to be clear, I'm a department head. I am solely responsible for the policies of CREST, the writing of them, the development of them, the implementation of them. And so I think sometimes, and right, this is brand new for all of us, most of these programs are under another agency. We are writing a new policy book, and just two pieces. We're really thinking about policies in a radical way. We want to think about what we don't want to replicate in law enforcement, either because our law enforcement does it already, or because we think it is antithetical to what we're doing. But I just want to be clear, because I think my role may sometimes be murky, that I am responsible, ultimately, good or bad, for those things to the town manager and ultimately as an appointee to the town council. So they have a hand in every policy that will be developed and the approval of it. But I am solely responsible for those pieces, as I will be for the town side of the MOU with the approval of the town manager and town council.
Earl, may I correct you, gently correct you? You are an employee of the town. The town develops and develops policies that guide your organization. So I want to be clear about that. Yeah. Your policies are within the organization. Policies of the town guides your organization. Sure. Is that clear?
Sure, but CRES's policies. I think, I'd love to have a longer conversation with you, Irv. I'm really interested in these. I think me and you could probably talk about this all day, and I hope we find an opportunity to. What I don't want to do is abdicate my responsibility and the role that I do have in these things. I'm not powerless in this. I'm not afraid of being run over by folks. I've been here 6 months now, and I've found that there is a real platform to build on these things. So be glad to have a longer conversation with any of you, but particularly this particular one with you, Irv.
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in real quick if I could, and just point out that, I mean, this is a new concept, right? We're Irv is building a plane. I mean, or Earl is building an airplane while it's flying. We're trying to figure out how to build the tarmac that it can land on, right? That's essentially what this is. I think we need to acknowledge that we're starting with a blank canvas and like a palette full of gray, right? So we need to sort a whole bunch of details out, and we could probably dig deep into the minutia, as to what that looks like. But I think this is a good preliminary conversation for us. Allison?
Yeah, because you talked about sort of like you're writing the MOU and working on that, and I'm just curious because like thinking about sort of moving on and further conversation, and feels like maybe that conversation can happen when we have sort of a draft, and just wondering sort of when approximately you're targeting for that to be.
So I was just waiting to talk with you all. Because I had the opportunity to talk to the two boards, I wanted to make sure that I didn't kind of get the work ahead of that. I anticipate having a half draft, right? Because I can't write Mike's pieces to Mike by the close of business on Friday. And then, I think Mike has probably a few more stakeholders than I do. But I think it would be reasonable to assume that by the end of October, we'll be in a pretty firm place. I don't want to lock that in as like a solid place, but I think there will be something for folks to review by the end of October.
Yeah.
Stop me if I overpromise you on that, Mike.
Do we have any more comments regarding the MOU?
Yeah, well, this MOU have to be approved by the school committee, and also will have to be approved by the town manager.
On my end, I can say it will have to be approved by the town manager.
Yep. And I would just say that, if we're using the other MOAs we have, it typically is the town manager and the superintendent who would be the signatories of that. It's not to say that we wouldn't want other bodies to review it, but that's sort of typically how it would function.
Again, will the school committee have to approve it?
I don't want to answer for the committee, but in general, MOUs like this would be approved by myself and the town manager in this case, and Earl. If the school committee wants to have a different opinion on that, then we should have that conversation. But maybe we could let Talb and Earl go off into their evening if we want to talk about that further.
Yeah, we can add that to an agenda.
Thank you all for being so generous with your time. I know this is a challenging issue and you have to grapple with it. I'm glad that you're asking these questions. I'm glad that you're being so challenging with it. And I don't want to imply that us not being there is, hey, however you choose to go with this, I ultimately believe that we have a role to play with all folks in town, including young people. And whether that's today or down the line, I think the sooner the better. But I'm glad to be a part of your community. I'm glad to be a part of this. And I look forward to working with you all, hopefully for a long time to come. I'm a little ways away from retirement, so I think I'll be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Earl.
Thank both of you for coming out tonight. And Talib, thank you for taking a step away from your baby boy's birthday party. Give him a shout for me too.
Look at this.
I will. Take care. Yeah. Gotta look the part. All right, take care, everybody.
And now we are moving on to the budget survey. Is that Margaret? You want to take that?
So depending on when you looked at the agenda, you might have seen a couple different things. Friday, I asked Sasha to put up the Word document with the revisions from your feedback at the last meeting because I didn't have the SurveyMonkey format yet. So since then, Deb has been able to put the draft into SurveyMonkey, and Sasha was able to put up a PDF version of it on the site this morning. So I'm not sure whether you've all had a chance to look at it and see whether it reflects the comments from the last meeting. Maybe would it be helpful to bring up the SurveyMonkey version of it for people to look at? I'm not sure how you want to proceed.
Yeah, whichever is the most presentable, I guess.
I mean, you can do it, but would you like for me to bring one of those to share
Yeah,
the screen?
why don't you bring up the survey, they both say PDF, don't they?
One says survey form draft. The other one just says survey. Which one would you like me to bring up?
I think it's the second one.
The PDF is the one that does not say 9:15.
Okay,
Yes,
that's the
correct.
one you'd like me to bring up. I will do that right now. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yes, yeah. And I want to thank Sasha and Deb both for their help with all of this. Okay, so you talked about taking some of the questions that were at the end and moving them up to the beginning, which happens here. There was some wording that was suggested. I think those things have been added. Summit Academy, when it gets to the section about which schools you're familiar with or you're going to rate, I think Summit Academy has been added as its own unit rather than just as part of the high school. And I guess the other question was, what is it going to look like in SurveyMonkey? So this is it. These last sections from 11 on are the ones that there was some concern that it was too long and people felt responders wouldn't go through all of these. So these are now at the end. And the other questions are up at the top. So I'm looking for feedback from people. Nobody has anything to say? Oh, good, Peter.
Peter, go ahead.
I think you did. I think the work is good too. I think it's a good improvement. When I opened it up and just tried to scan it and understand it quickly as if I hadn't seen it before, which is hard to do because I've seen it before. I found it a lot easier to digest. I like the sequencing. I like the controls.
Okay.
I'm still worried about maybe my estimate of people's average attention span is lower than it actually is, but I still worry about response time the longer it gets. But I think we have to balance the information we're trying to gather as was discussed last time. So I appreciate this effort.
Thank you. There was somebody mentioned at some point at the last meeting about making some of the questions required. I'm not sure who that was and if anybody thinks we should do that.
Allison, then service.
I think there may have been somebody else who also suggested that. I can't remember, but I know that I talked about making some things not required as a way to enable people to skip questions in the interest of time. Like so, I think I would ask that that's a way sort of saying like we'd love you to answer this question, but you don't have to. And so I think that we would want to make some of them required to make sure that we are able to understand the feedback that we're getting. So I think questions 1, 2, and 3 might be the only ones that we make required, but I think at a minimum those should be required just so that we're what is your role in the district? What schools are you with? Which schools are you familiar with? And how do you rate them? End of story. And if they give us more, awesome. I don't know. Usually, rule of thumb, you don't make open-ended questions required.
Okay.
If somebody, I mean, you could make them required and people will game the system and just type a space bar or something in there. But that would be my initial thought. I mean, there's
Okay.
others that, of course, we'd love people to answer, but I think those are the minimum.
Okay.
Sarah Beth? You're muted still.
Sorry, I think pretty much the same thing Allison said. Those first 3 questions, if we're going to have required questions, I think after that, any information is better than no information. So even if they only get, a few in, that's still better than nothing. So I would say if we're going to require something, just 1, 2, and 3, and then leave the rest and hope for the best.
Okay. All right. We also talked about where we might have this available so that we could include community members. Someone mentioned, I think maybe it could be on the town website. My question to you is, should I pursue how we might do some of these things? I mean, we can send it out to the school community, presumably maybe Mike with your newsletter, and also I think it would be good to have it on the website where it's easy to get to. But how do you feel about my trying to find out how we could get this out more widely? I can report back.
Allison, go ahead.
I'd be happy to help you, Margaret, if you want that. I don't know,
Great.
how helpful I can be, but I would suggest reaching out to the PGOs also.
Okay.
The
right.
PGO, for example, the high school PGO has a weekly newsletter. I don't know if the middle school has something similar, or Summit, but those I think would be
Okay.
really helpful.
Okay. All right. Well, if there aren't any more conversations, then I guess I will assume that it's ready to go. And now it's just a matter of getting it out to people. And then hoping that we get some answers back from people.
Thank you so much for all your work on this too, by the way. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to mention is maybe offline we could talk about timing, because we are having a survey go out that's focused on more additional feedback for 6th grade to the middle school in the next week or 2. So I think in terms of survey fatigue, if we could just talk about how to coordinate those so that people don't get like consecutive days of surveys.
Okay.
People don't appreciate that. We've gotten that feedback very clearly in the past, and it's fair game. So we could talk offline about the timing and make sure that we adjust accordingly.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So now we'll move on to goal guidance prioritization. Mike.
This is actually back to you all. So, I think there was a conversation last time about prioritization. I sent the video, and Maylene, thank you, very quickly sent along sort of a summary of the comments from last time. I think just as a background, the contract says no more than 8 goals. And one of the 3 committees has approved goals that there's 5 of. Some of those have overlap, but that's my job to sort out and bring back to you next time. I think the job that for tonight, in my opinion, is to share a prioritization of what goals you feel like are most critical for the regional schools, and then I can bring back what I think is a reasonable approximation, staying within contractual guidelines of what goals might look like along those dimensions. So that's my sort of, bless you, 2 cents on that. And happy to just hear where people are on those, on the prioritization.
Peter, go ahead.
So just my 2 cents. I think any regional aspect of the 6-2 arms move is a pretty top priority in terms of a major cohort transition. I think that I think we heard a lot about mental health last time and how that was a priority. I'm not sure exactly how it fits as a singular goal. I think there was a comment last time, I think, about how it ought to be weaved in as a theme through a number of goals, but I think that's probably your challenge, is how to articulate that as a a calendar school year goal, when the concept of supporting mental health writ large is obviously always a priority. I think safety is probably a pretty high topic. Safety defined multiple ways, but I think for a number of reasons that's an important part. And I mean, I would just also just put my own personal pitch that I think capital is to me a significant priority. If it's not an articulated goal this year, I can understand that it might get pushed off the list given the number of overlap. But I do think we should start thinking about how we communicate, advocate, get going with a long-term strategy for capital, because obviously we have major resource constraints there. There's other things I would love you to do, but that's that's what hits me right now.
Allison, go ahead.
Sorry, is there a document that we're looking at that? I think you mentioned that there was a document that we're looking at for prioritization, but I don't.
Oh, I'm sorry. No,
Yeah.
Maylene summarized the notes from the prior conversation and sent an email out soon after the last meeting. So at least maybe I'm making this up, but I believe that got sent out. I'm seeing some people shake their head yes, and some people shake their head no. So
I didn't see anything.
Yeah, I can try to look for it.
I've got it, and I can forward it to the committee.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm sorry if there was some technical glitch. I think it went to the regional school committee at ARP's address, if I recall.
September 14th is when it was sent. But I just forwarded it to the regional school committee email again.
Margaret, go ahead.
So, just, I guess for me, I think that safety, all the aspects of safety in the school are really a priority for this year, should be. And the mental health, which, I don't know whether that can work into the safety as well as some other things or not. I agree with Peter about the capital budget. I think the way the economy is moving is not favorable for our capital expenditures. And I think it's something that we really have to start to plan, as Peter said. I guess for me, those are really the two top, or three.
Greg in. I did see you, Greg in. Go ahead, Greg.
Can you just summarize what are some of the items on the cap? Is it just capital planning in general, or are there a few key things that are on your mind, with Margaret and Peter, since you both mentioned it?
For me, I think it's somewhat general. There are some really significant expenditures coming up in the next few years, like roofs and other kinds of equipment. And Doug had prepared like a 10-year capital plan last year. And we've talked about shoving some things out even farther than they are on that plan. But I think because of what's happening in the economy, it's something that we really need to start to look at in a little more detail broadly.
Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, and just building on that, I mean, for me, it's what Margaret said, but so it's sort of a bringing public awareness that our two buildings are quite old now, relative, and it's difficult because there's a lot of attention to capital infrastructure needs in the town of Amherst, particularly at the elementary level, that are real and appropriate, and so this, coming from the Amherst point of view, I think the region capital needs get lost in the shuffle sometimes. So it's all these things that we're going to have to do just to keep things efficient and maintained for these two buildings, but also the quality of the facilities, right? We've talked about the girls' locker room for I don't know how long, and just as the years go by, where the physical spaces that our students learn in are going to, the quality is just going to degrade unless we continue to invest in it, and it's a very difficult ask at the region, and the capital process is a complex one, getting sign off from all the members. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I mean, I could name you detailed items on the list, but I don't think we want to go there.
Irv, and then I think Allison.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of schools, in terms of priorities in relationship to this topic, health and safety are always number one, because if you don't take care of the health and safety of the students, faculty, and staff, and that is not adequately taken care of, then the enterprise is in great danger. So I always consider that to be the first priority. Even when thinking about budgets, you always want to really make sure that the health and safety are taken care of first, because without that being covered first, then the enterprise is in danger. So I consider that to be one of the priority items. The other priority items obviously circles around budget as it relates to capital improvement. Capital improvement. That is something that has to be managed by all of us in a very careful manner, in a very thoughtful manner as we go forward. That certainly is one of the top priorities, because if your infrastructure, especially your physical infrastructure, where student and staff have to work, study, and learn, if that is in any way compromised, then the learning environment is compromised.
Allison?
Yeah, I wonder if thank you to Sarah Beth and Jennifer for forwarding that. So that was helpful. But I wonder if the focus on the strategic plan is a way to sort of prioritize and capture a lot of these items that we're talking about, because in the strategic plan, as I recall, there's discussion on facilities or infrastructure. There's discussion on mental health and inclusion and belonging. There's a lot of the things that we're talking about, I think. It's been a while since I looked at it, but are kind of encaptured in there. And a lot of work went into, broad-based input and sort of work in pulling that together. And because of COVID, we sort of stopped at the implementation part of it. And not that the school district stopped, but but in terms of formalizing and sort of how we're implementing, how we're tracking, how we're doing on that strategic plan, I do wonder if that might be a way to prioritize a bunch of these in a way of, really sort of focusing on what is our implementation plan for that strategic plan, and sort of outlining that plan to address that and deliver on that.
Anyone else have anything to add? All right, so we'll move on to health and safety updates.
There's a hand up, so that's not mine.
Go ahead, Margaret. Sorry about that.
So perhaps it would be helpful if we could receive a copy of where the strategic plan was at the time it was halted, because that was when I first came on the committee. And a number of the people on here never have seen the strategic plan or know anything about it. So if we're going to, I don't know if you're suggesting maybe that should be a goal, that we try to implement it, but I think we all need to see it. And regardless of whether it's a goal or not, we probably all should see it. So
I'll email it out to the group tomorrow.
Perfect. And so now we'll do the health and safety updates.
Okay. So I included, it's nothing new, it's the COVID document from August that was emailed out to all staff and all families. It details our COVID regs for this year. We still recommend that masks and face coverings are used in indoor settings. It's very clear they're effective at preventing COVID-19, but they are not required, except in the nurse's office. We still are providing those masks free of charge, and we know that I see every day that some students and staff are accessing them on a regular basis. We still recommend people, and I did this today. I have a non-COVID head cold, and I didn't go in because I'm not sick. I'm not healthy. So I, worked all day, but I didn't go into the office because I didn't think it was wise to go into the office. And, so we have those symptoms, and that is still in place. And, we don't do full physical distancing the way that we did in the past, but, we have tried when possible to keep students not at least surrounded by other students. And I think our secondary schools, it's a little easier at the elementary level, which has more table groups. That's where it gets a little harder in different districts. But at the secondary school level, we know kids are going to work on group projects and they're going to be close to each other, but we're not necessarily setting scenarios up where for 75-minute or 80-minute class periods that kids are surrounded by other kids in the same way that we, might have before. It looks a little more traditional in classrooms during times where the teacher is the primary instructor, and then other times where students are working closely together, and trying to get that balance right. We do have visitors allowed in buildings. We do recommend face masks, just like or mask or face covering, just like for students and staff. But we are utilizing virtual meetings when possible. IEP meetings has been a great example. That's been greatly appreciated by many family members. Not that we never have in-person IEP meetings, but it's been very convenient for folks to be able to Zoom into a meeting. And so, that's actually worked very well. And in other scenarios like open house, which we talked about earlier, we do in person. And so we try to mix and match based on the topic at hand. We still have the state recommendations for isolation after a positive COVID test. The nurse still recommended. We are maintaining our district dashboard, which I think very few districts still are, but I appreciate Robin Supernaut, Deborah Smorlin, who are in charge of that. And it helps us keep track of any trends that we should want to be noticing. If a student tests positive, or an individual, I should say, tests positive, it's a 5-day isolation, not in school. On days 6 through 10, the students or staff members have face coverings except while they're eating or drinking. And when that starts is a conversation with the nurse. And I want to really, again, thank our wonderful nurses in the school, because it's not as simple. It's sort of like when you test positive or notice the first symptoms, it's often a conversation with the family or staff member to determine when day 0 is. And there are local experts, and we just really appreciate their work on that. We do have rapid tests available free of charge for symptomatic individuals, as long as they filled out their consent. So we sent that out multiple times over the last couple of weeks. We have a large number, I don't have the exact number, but a large number of people did respond with that consent. We did include something. We're going to include it again because I keep on getting asked the same question, but folks with health insurance in general, and certainly any employee with health insurance, can get significant number of free tests at local pharmacies. I'm trying not to use names, but I'm just going to say CVS because there's 2 of them in Amherst. Feel silly not to name it. There are other ones as well that are covered by insurance. So if people are looking for rapid tests for asymptomatic testing, I believe it's, at least through our insurance, our employees, I believe it's 8 per member on the health plan. So for a family of 4 with a health plan, that would be 32 tests per month that are covered through insurance. And many other employers' insurance policies have very similar practices. So we are protesting. The state discontinued their system, but we're encouraging folks who want to receive rapid tests for use at home to access that through health insurance whenever possible. And I think that's sort of where we are on health and safety regs at the regional level. Certainly happy to answer any questions that anyone might have for me.
Peter, go ahead.
Thank you for the update. Do you have any, have you seen any concerns emerging in terms of staff levels with the up and down surges of COVID so far? And obviously we're heading into the winter, and how do you feel in terms of preparedness for that? If we happen to hit some kind of a surge and we need to, keep the doors open and the lights on. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. I wouldn't say that we've seen wild surges, but we're still seeing cases every day, right? And so I have a hard time keeping my personal viewpoint out of this conversation. So I'm going to do my best, but I'm very much a pro indoor mask person. I'm not saying that anyone should make the same choice, but it's certainly, well, here's what I'll say. So, Massachusetts has seen a significant uptick in the last 14 days compared to the 14 days before it, about 40% increase across our state. So we are reiterating that we're encouraging mask uses. We're not requiring it. Am I concerned what that looks like when the weather changes even more than it has now? Absolutely, I'm concerned. And I think, I have seen some shift in behavior of staff, not that we've told them to, and students, as there are positive cases, but it's the rules are confusing for folks because the rules are wide open. So then you get into individual decision making versus collective decision making, and I'll probably get myself in trouble if I keep on talking more because I know I'm an outlier in some ways in my personal viewpoints on this particular matter. So yes, I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned what that looks like for staff, for students. MCAS results will come out later this week. I promise there's a connection I'm making. I was in a webinar. I can't share anything about it. It's embargoed data from the state. But one of the things that was maybe not shocking, but the sheer number was the number of students, the increase in students who are what's called chronically absent. So that's absent for at least 10% of the school year, right? In one way, that's not surprising because, COVID's around, and so that's a lot more absences. On the other hand, we think about the implications for learning. So separate from the teacher coverage, we think about the implications for learning, and that's deeply concerning. So I think at that point, I'm really going to stop myself because I'd rather not be in the news for this tomorrow. So I'll leave it there.
Any other health and safety related questions?
I'll just ask quickly. You recently had a booster clinic. How well was it attended, and is there any, especially with staff and student families?
Yeah, so that was really a positive event. We had over 170 folks attend. It was Cataldo Ambulance, which was one of the primary state vendors or folks who work with the state for clinics. They said it was the largest clinic they'd seen in Western Massachusetts in months and months and months. I know the town of Amherst held a booster clinic the week after. They also had 170 folks come in for boosters, including some of our staff and students. It was kind of like tail end of the school day. You could still make it for that. So I do think there's folks interested, but I would say the interest in boosters is not as strong as the interest of primary vaccination. There's no judgment in that comment. I think it's just my experience tells me that that's both a general comment, but also in our community that I don't think there's the same level of eagerness for boosters than there was on the initial vaccination. And again, I'm trying to be, people read into whatever they want on that one, but I think that's a factual statement.
Anyone else? All right, so we'll move on to the 6th grade move to the Amherst Regional Middle School planning. And there are documents in the.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just share a brief update, which is that we are in the process nearing the end of a process to finalize a plan for additional feedback to be received. We have a survey with more focused questions that is just about done to gather additional feedback. Well, one of the pieces of feedback we got from the last survey was too open-ended, right? It was like a 13-page document. What are your thoughts? And so we collected some primary areas to ask for feedback within. We will be going to, and I know this is a different district, but I'm just going to give you the whole shebang. We're going to every 5th grade classroom in the Amherst public schools, asking for their feedback because they are the primary audience right now to receive that. We're also will be meeting with the middle school student council as well as the middle school faculty and staff in the next couple of weeks to gather their feedback in in-person sessions. We're trying to figure out whether we do more in-person or more virtual stuff for members of the community in addition to the survey. We're still sort of tweaking what we want to do there. So we are actively looking at that. The number of students, if you look at the cohort that's coming up, it's actually a bit smaller than what we originally projected. So I believe it's 139 students coming up. We were talking about more like 150, 160 moving up. So that actually shifts some of the numbers from a logistic space orientation in a positive direction to have fewer students moving up the first year. So that's sort of the summary of where we are. From the regional perspective, I'm excited about the arrival of 6th graders. I think having, at least for our middle schoolers, many of our middle schoolers, having a multi-year or a 3-year experience in our school will enhance not just the 6th grade year for those who come, but actually the 7th and 8th grade year. And we're really trying to balance that with the implications for 6th grade students who don't come, you know, from Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury. And it's a tricky balance. I'll give you a really tangible example. When it comes to language, it was referenced in the public comment. We're getting some strong feedback from folks. I'm getting some strong feedback from folks in Amherst that would really like to see the language piece be more, give students the opportunity to dig in to a language in 6th grade instead of an exploratory model where students take a quarter of Spanish, a quarter Latin, a quarter French, and a quarter Chinese, and then make a decision. So I'm getting really strong feedback on that particular point. And one of the concerns of our language folks is that's fine, but if we do that, then those students will be ready for the 2nd year of the language in 7th grade. And then, you know, that means that presumably 6th grade Amherst students would be with 7th grade Shutesbury, Leverett, and other students from the towns and maybe joint classes. And how do people feel about that? And right, so that's a conversation to come. I'm not ready to dig in on that one tonight because we're in the feedback gathering mode still. But I think that just is one of these pieces that hits on the fact that, you know, we have 75, 80% of kids coming for 6th grade and not 100% of kids. And this is actually where the regional school committee plays a big role, because you may have different opinions on that. Even though it's an Amherst school committee, there may be a regional opinion on, you know, how to approach that and how that feels for folks who aren't sending their 6th graders, who, you know, the towns who are sending it in 7th grade. So I thought that was the most tangible example of like where this gets complicated. But from a kind of planning perspective, I think we have a good plan to gather more feedback. And from a numbers perspective, it's looking favorable in terms of space. We sort of did a worst case scenario planning in terms of space, and it looks like that it won't come to fruition for us next year. So that's sort of my update. I'm happy to answer any questions committee members have on where we are with this.
So I read the report, which I think is great, and then I had some questions. I have some questions on it that from a regional perspective. So is now the time for us to give input and ask questions about the report? So I'm seeing Mike nodding, so I'm just going to keep going. I guess you say that there are many reasons that this is complex, and I guess one that I'm having trouble wrapping my head around is the impact to current middle school staff and administration. So all the places in the report where it talked about, where it mentioned anything about adding to the responsibilities or the duties of current middle school staff or administration or teachers, I don't really I guess I don't really, I'm having trouble wrapping my head around that. So like if there was one mention of suggesting like right now the middle school has a principal and 2 teacher leaders. And so one mentioned adding a third teacher leader for sixth grade. And it mentioned that sixth grade would be like a department within the middle school. And like that sounds like it's adding to the responsibilities of current middle school administration and teachers. So they're a regional staff, right? But they're taking on Amherst students. And so the Amherst sixth graders are not going to be students of the region. They're still students of Amherst. But now are we burdening, not burdening, but are we asking current staff and teachers to take on more work and more work and responsibilities and to be responsible for more students? And how does that work?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so I think that's spot on, and I think I might have said this earlier when this came up, but it might be in my head because I can't remember who I've spoken to about what with this one, so I apologize in advance. So I spent little time with that committee because I wanted the committee to do its work without it feeling like the superintendent was hovering around it, and I wanted their ideas to come out. That's one I did jump in on, and I suggested that really it needs to have an administrative lead that's dedicated to sixth grade. I suggested, perhaps like a guidance counselor / sixth grade administrator, given the number of kids, it's not that many kids, and we want to have mental health staff there. But just simply from an evaluation perspective, the job becomes undoable from middle school perspective, in my opinion, if there's not a dedicated administrator for the sixth grade. I think there was general support for that. I came in towards the end of their work, right? And so I think there is reflected a bit in the report as a possible option, but I will say publicly here that I do believe that has to be in place, that I don't think it's a reasonable expectation. I think there are some positions that are probably not movable that way, like the custodial staff, right? The kids are going to be there, right? We can't resolve that. I think when we get to a different committee, we can talk about how many students are actually still going to be left in the K-5 in some of our schools and whether that's shifting people or, right, there's lots of conversations on staffing to come. But in terms of administrative leadership, I couldn't agree more with you that is not a reasonable burden to put on the 7th and 8th grade regional leadership team. I think there's, nurse, custodial, right? There are some office staff. There's some gray that we'll have to work through, but I think just also from a safety perspective, I think it's just really important that there's clear lines around that.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense, and that helps. Thank you. But in terms of, so say there were an administrator sort of in charge of the sixth graders, would that person report to the middle school principal? How would that work? And because I assume the middle school principal is kind of already super busy with the 7th and 8th graders. So are we asking at the highest level, are we asking the principal, here's a bunch more students for you that you're going to be ultimately, in charge of, through your
Right.
subordinates?
The model that's worked well that I would try to emulate is the Summit Academy high school model, where they share a space. And Talib and Dave talk frequently. If it comes to student safety or building safety, they're constantly in communication. Does Talib know some kids at Summit Academy? Absolutely. Does Dave know some people at the high school? Absolutely. Does Dave feel a non-safety responsibility for the academic success of kids at the high school? Philosophically, yes. Practically, probably not, right? They've each got their own roles, and that's been, we would spend a lot of time working on that, because for those who don't remember, aren't aware, Summit Academy used to be in its own separate building, and I think that's a model that's working really well and something that we'd want to emulate, that there is collaboration but not the overall responsibility, because I'd have the same concerns you have. I completely agree, Jennifer.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, I read this whole thing, and the reason that I read it is because at one point in my career in education, I was involved with a whole brand new school and planning that, and all of that went into it. So I really appreciated the document that was put together by this team. One of the things that I wanted to highlight was one of the recommendations that they made, and I just would like to read it. The transition committee believes that both the 3-team and 4-team schedules allow for a rich educational experience for the 6th graders transitioning to ARMS. And while the committee was pleased to present both for consideration, there was strong agreement that the smaller class sizes possible with the 4-team schedule are much more preferable. This is particularly true in terms of students' social and emotional safety, since the smaller classes would allow them to form stronger connections with both their classmates and the adults who work with them. And I couldn't agree more. given the newness of the situation, the kids going into this particular situation, being able to bond with school students who are coming from different two different schools. That's good. That's a great thing. The same thing for teachers. So I guess I really resonated with their recommendation.
So if I could jump in, Ben, I apologize. So I really don't like to be the OML, whatever it is, CRESS officer, responder. But I just think that's, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with that comment. I think that'd be a great comment for the Amherst School Committee, but I think since the regional school committee, we really have to focus on regional only items. So I don't mean to be awkward about it, but I just want to make sure we're watching that aspect of it. Sorry, Irv.
Yeah, I'm just saying, this document was in our packet, and
Yep.
in the regional school committee packet. In the future, if such things are going to be part of an OML, then they should be pointed out in the packet themselves, rather than for a school committee like my person like me having to make those determinations.
Fair point. Yep. Thanks, Irv, and I apologize.
Sarah Beth? Nope, sorry, you're on mute still. Yep.
Sorry, I'm struggling today, apparently. So I really appreciate this document. I feel like clearly people put a lot of hard work and thought and care into creating this, and it's very succinct and easy to digest the information. I have a couple of questions about some of the recommendations. So there are things about the physical space that they're being recommended, like either altering the bathrooms or was it including a new bathroom? So when it comes to things like that, that are altering the physical space that currently belongs to the region, but it's being altered specifically to house the 6th grade from Amherst, how do the finances work with that, and who's in charge of those projects?
Is okay to answer, or was Craig a follow-up to Sarah Bess's question? Okay. It's okay to respond, Ben?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I think those recommendations, some of the recommendations around facilities are not quite feasible, separate from the finances of them. Just their infrastructure wise is not, pipes are there and you can't always move them. I don't have the best language, particularly this hour of night with my cold at play. So I think if there were infrastructure challenges, we would have to bring them back to this committee to weigh in on, because the town of Amherst is not buying the middle school building. It's renting space in it, and if it's making adjustments, that this is something that the regional school committee have to weigh on long before it happened, and we even talk about financing, because it's a building that's not owned by the Amherst Public Schools. Does that help with answer your question? I mean, I don't want to get into who pays for it, because I don't.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's a conversation. It's the right question. I think that would be a conversation for multiple committees to have, and I may have an opinion, but I don't think I'm the decision maker on that, if that makes sense.
Nope, that is a totally sufficient answer at this stage of the game.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
So my question is almost a follow-up to Sarah Bess's, in that I don't want to create a timeline. I'd love to hear your timeline, and maybe now is not the time to answer, which is okay. But conversation should be happening with Shutesbury, Pelham, and Amherst about the regional agreement, and specifically the 6th grade. I mean, it doesn't have to happen right now. You and I have spoken about this. Understanding the need for space was priority, but these conversations, at least investigative in conversations, to discuss what each town sees differently regarding the agreement, because it's going to eventually be discussed. This item here alone is enough to start that conversation. Doesn't mean it has to be the only part. I mean, there will be other parts that you've indicated in other talks. So I just want to encourage a community approach to the next things happening. That's all.
Thank you. Peter?
So yeah, just to follow up on Craig, I mean, so I agree. Generally speaking, there are a number of different reasons for the towns to get together and look at updating the regional agreement. However, I think we do, for this implementation, right, for sixth grade to go to the middle school next September, does, as far as I understand it, Dr. Morris, does not require the towns to update the regional agreement. However, there will be a need for a legal agreement between the regional school district and the Amherst elementary school district because of resource sharing and how those costs play out and whatnot. And in that we need to get the ball rolling on, sooner rather than later, so that it's not rushed towards the end. But a full on update of the regional agreement is not required for this. Yes.
Can I respond, Ben?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's true. Everything Peter said. I also think, and I don't think I'll regret saying this, but I might. Is if Mark Terry was here, our attorney, he would say it would behoove the four towns for multiple reasons. This being one of them, but we have an assessment conversation that has shifted, and looking at the regional agreement, there's other questions about the regional agreement that have come up, some tonight about transportation that you raised, Craig. I think we keep delaying, we collectively, and I have ownership of this too, delaying that conversation. And I actually do think it's wise, because it's not a short process, to start figuring out a timeline of how we're going to do that. I agree with Peter. It doesn't need to happen, and it wouldn't happen even if we said we needed it to. This process, according to Mark Terry, takes multiple years in most districts. I think that's a good reason to actually get started instead of waiting super long, because I think it's, with terms and people staying on the committee or coming off the committee, one of the reasons it takes a while is there's not necessarily, the players change. And then we're talking about engaging finance committees and select boards and town councils, and even trying to conceptualize who's going to be in the room to have these conversations is not an obvious and simple thing. So my personal opinion is, the sooner we rip the Band-Aid off and start saying, yeah, we're going to take a look at this and figure out what we need to do with it. And we know it's going to be a long, cumbersome, painful process, but we haven't made permanent amendments to the regional school agreement in a very long time. I get questions all the time. I mean, maybe it's because of the head cold of the hour. I'll just be really blunt. Like, I get questions all the time. Why does Pelham have 2 members and Shutesbury and Leverett have 1? And my answer is because that's what the regional agreement says. Right. And I'd like to, and I'm not suggesting there's a problem with that. It's just not a very good answer, because then someone will say, well, when was the regional agreement written? And my quick answer is before I was born, right? And probably before most of the people on this call were born. I'm not going to ask specifics, but that's probably the case. And so, for many people in our community, that's not a particularly satisfying answer. And not that there's a problem with Pelham having 2 members and Leverett Shutesbury having 1, or Amherst having 5 members. I'm not wed to anything, but I think my reliance on a document that I believe was completed sometime in the late 50s is not, doesn't feel great. And I think it's probably long overdue to have a look at that. And this is one aspect of it. And you can imagine many others that people will raise. And I raised that one in particular because I know it'll be a hot topic, but not talking about it doesn't make it go away, is my point. And so, I don't know. You all can do what you like with it. Fortunately, I mostly get to be an observer and data supplier on that one. But it does need to. Mark is very clear. Our legal counsel is very clear. You can deal with a short-term agreement for a year or two, but the regional agreement really does need eventually to be reflective of this change plus other changes that have happened legally and otherwise in the last 70 some odd years. My math may be off late at night. I apologize.
Margaret,
I usually don't go so ranty, but you got me going on this one. So sorry, Craig and Peter.
So talking about this, being a person from Pelham, has just got me thinking about the financial aspects of the regional budget for 6th graders from Amherst and not from Pelham and Shutesbury and Leverett. And where is the responsibility going to be? So I'm not asking you for an answer. I'm just saying this is something that just came into my mind tonight after this conversation. So another thing that I'm sure is going to come up.
Absolutely. I mean, I think when we talked about this originally, there has to be some net financial benefit to the region for the rental of space. And then, I talked about some of the staff that is shared, whether that's, in kind, like more staff that come from the Amherst Public Schools for some of the non-teaching work, but also some other aspects as well. So I think that's spot on. And that's why, to Peter's point, I think a temporary agreement, likely is the way to go in the short term, but I think codifying it long term in a more formal document is probably advisable.
Allison, go ahead.
This is just minor, but just a clarification. Like Margaret's question, as I recall, the region is not responsible for the cost of educating the sixth graders. That is still borne by the Amherst public schools. So teachers, that's anything related to educating sixth graders, it's not like the population of the middle school just increased, right? So it's what we're talking about from a financial perspective is the rental agreement. So what are the costs that, the facilities costs that the region currently is bearing that now we want to send an invoice to the Amherst public schools for some of that electricity or custodial service and that the like, is that correct? Yeah, okay.
Anyone else want to weigh in? Looking around, seeing no. So we can move on to future agenda planning next. Do we have the document to share, Mike?
Let me see if I can pull it up. Not in a great format. Let me see if I can do it orally. I'll also try to put it in the chat. It's probably too many topics for a meeting, but I'll just put what I have down. So superintendent salary increase, however we want to term it. I was trying to riff off Peter's terminology earlier, so I don't know if that's the right one, but superintendent, whatever that ends up being. There was a request for student cell phone, having conversations about cell phones, returning to in-person school committee meetings, late start survey results, which I'm actually really excited to present because I think there's a lot of rich data in there. There was a solar study done last spring that I think as we talk about infrastructure, would kind of give some information of possible directions to move forward. There was a conversation around safety, internal and external, that folks asked for, enrollment update. We'll do the fourth quarter budget update from last fiscal year, and I should add goals. So I leave it to the committee for what they want to weigh in on, add, delete, change.
Yeah, Craig, go ahead.
Are these all agenda items that are going to be discussed at our next meeting? I mean, I guess I'm just a little confused. I don't know this agenda item, generally speaking. Future, how future are we talking about?
Yeah, like for the next meeting. Go ahead, Margaret.
It seems to me last year we had a document with all of the meeting dates in it, and we were able to sort of plug in some things over the course of the year. Do we have something like that this year?
Yes, we do. It's just that we sort of have separate documents for each of the three committees. So, but I can send out what we have. It's not going to have, it started, yeah, people were getting information for committees they weren't on. It just got, for some people, a little funky. It was easy for me, to be honest with you. I liked it, but but we do have ones with all the dates on it, and certainly, I try to keep it updated, at least for the region in Pelham. I think Amherst has a separate, actually, I guess it does have some of the Amherst ones as well, but I'll send it out to the committee after the meeting. So at least you could look at it. So, we'll see if it's as clean as last year, but I know some people felt sometimes a little awkward about having access to agendas that on committees they weren't a part of, or other people having access to the committees they were a part of out of turn. So I don't know. It's not my concern because I work for all three. So whatever people want to do with it.
I guess I was just thinking that it seemed like there was something you brought up at each of the meetings that we were able to say, okay, this could go, you know, like, this is probably too many things for our next meeting, but where could we put them, you know, instead of just having a list like this each time?
Yeah, it was kind of easier to visualize it. Peter, go ahead.
So the agenda items for each of the committees is public info because it's the agenda planning, that is, it's the calendar, it's shared at the end of each meeting. So my 2 cents, Mike, is that if it's an organizational structure that makes things easier to organize for you and that it's obviously useful to each of the committees, as long as, you know, just reach out to each of the chairs, and if they don't express concerns, then I think you can use that. It's better than, you know, losing track of things and then you know, you have enough districts to oversee.
I've shared what I had with the regional school committee, so that hopefully it's a helpful tool and we can see how we tweak it over time.
So that is kind of looking like a deep agenda there. Are there any items that other folks, I'll weigh in after, but think could move ahead to the following meeting? Allison, go ahead.
I'm not adding, but I think that there's a couple things that have to be done next week. So that, you know, that's the superintendent salary increase, the goals. I would say the fourth quarter budget review, because I think we've pushed it off a little bit already. So that I think is required. An enrollment update, because we need that for beginning the budget conversations for the next fiscal year. That also feels timely for early October. So I think like the others, like, fit them in if they fit, and if not, then those potentially have a little bit of wiggle room. They're not sort of as time sensitive as the other, those four.
Great, go ahead.
I have a somewhat unrelated question. I was just checking my calendar because Allison, you just mentioned a meeting. Is there a meeting next week? Okay, I'm sorry, but I did notice there's a guardrails meeting next week with the Fort Town assessments. I don't know how involved any of you are in these discussions or these thoughts. If there's anyone here who would be willing to chat with me offline outside of a meeting, who's particularly interested in this, especially if you're from Amherst, I'd be curious to connect. You could just raise a hand and I'll give you a call. Peter? Okay, I'll reach out to you. Thanks.
If the only thing I would add is I'd really, even if it's a brief presentation, the late start results, I just worry they're going to get stale because they were all from late summer or late spring. And I know I shared the results with you, you being the committee, although Allison, I know we just fixed that. Hopefully you got that a long time ago, but it's actually relevant for the conversation we had tonight about transportation. I'd like to do that next time because I feel like, you know, it keeps getting pushed, but I agree. Otherwise, I completely agree with Allison's, what Allison shared in terms of prioritization. And Ben and I can tweak this moving forward and see what we can push. I mean, since we meet twice a month, it feels like we have, you know, more adjustments that we can make that way, as opposed to the other committees I have, which only meet once a month.
Anybody else have any input? I was gonna say, I imagine members of the student body wouldn't mind if we push the student cell phone topic along with, but yeah, I think we can just roll with this and then tweak what we have to in the meantime, if everybody's okay with that. All right, so we can move on, unless anybody else has any input. Going once, going twice. We can go on to the warrant report. Is that Irv?
Let's see. So I think there are like, I don't know, 3 or 4. So I, Irv Rose, authorized by my signature the payables in the amount of $163,018.15. This is a warrant dated 9/21/2022 and signed on 9/21/22. Second one is I was authorized by signatures payable in the amount of $4,521.16, and also for fund expenses of $737,219.58. This is for a warrant dated 9/23/2022 and signed on that same day. I was authorized by my signature payable and in the amount of $812,024.46. This warrant was dated on the 21st of September and signed on the 21st of September. And the last one is was authorized by my signatures, an amount of $814,521.14. This was dated on the 23rd and signed on the 23rd of September.
Jennifer, go ahead.
I don't know if this is an Irv question or a Ben question, but in the future, can we see the warrants posted to board docs? Because I take in information better when I can see it while it's being read. Like I can't necessarily, especially at this late at night, like take in the numbers and the information. Like, and it would be nice to be able to read along.
Well, one of the things that could happen is that I guess this would have to be something that Doug or someone else would, or the school committee would say, hey, that these documents should be circulated to every school committee member and made available to them via the same means that they're made available to me.
I don't think that's a requirement. I think it's just required for one person to sign them, and then they get read out loud at a meeting. But in the past, we have had them posted to board docs so that we can see them while you're reading them. That's all I'm asking.
Right.
Yeah, no, I was gonna actually make the same exact comment after they went, because I'm the same way. Like I can hear it, and it's different for me in my processing.
Since someone's going to have to tell someone to
I can do
post them all on board docs.
Yep, I can do that.
Thanks, Ben.
So next up we have accepting of gifts. So is there anybody revved up and raring to read that off? Jennifer, go ahead.
I would love to read the gifts. I move that we accept the following gifts from Madeline Remensnyder, GoFundMe fundraiser, various donors to support Sehan Islam Memorial Scholarship in the amount of $1,549.72. And further, that we accept the following grants from Amherst Education Foundation number 1617 to support high school and middle school restorative justice initiative in the amount of $10,000. And from Amherst Education Foundation number 1676 for to support high school, middle school, and elementary theater in the amount of $9,535 for a total of $19,535.
Second that. Oh. Go ahead, Mike.
Just two notes on this. One happy, one sad, which is just to acknowledge Amherst Education Foundation, their tremendous support of our schools. Can't say it enough, and every time we accept gifts, I think it's worth mentioning that. Also, just for people who didn't know the name, Sehan was the student who passed away in a car accident last spring. So we greatly appreciate the community support in creating a memorial scholarship that supports other students moving forward in his name and in his memory. So just want to acknowledge both of those things. Thank you, Ben.
I'll go ahead and take a quick roll call vote. Irv?
Aye.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
Craig?
Aye.
Margaret?
Margaret, aye.
Sarah Vess?
Sarah Vess, aye.
Allison?
Allison, I.
Jennifer?
Jennifer, aye.
And me, Ben, also aye. Motion passes unanimously. And I will now take another motion.
I move
Move
that
that
we adjourn.
Jinx? Let me go.
Second.
Okay. All right. Another roll call vote. Me, aye. Irv?
Irv, aye.
Craig?
Craig, aye.
Jennifer,
Jennifer, I.
Allison,
Allison, I.
Sarah Bess,
Sarah Bass, aye.
Margaret,
Margaret, I.
and Peter.
Peter abstain.
The motion passes and we are now adjourned. See you all next time.
Good night.